10, 9, ignition sequence.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
1, 0, and liftoff.
Mission complete, Houston. After serving the world for over 30 years, the space shuttle earned its place in history and has come to a final stop.
Good morning and welcome to today's International Space Station update. You're joining us here inside of the flight control room in Houston, Texas, where the Orbit 2 team is currently on console, monitoring all of the systems on board this orbiting laboratory. They're being led today by Flight Director Ed Van Cise, shown there in the red shirt, and joining him at the Capcom position is NASA astronaut Sandy Magnus, serving as the communication link between teams here on the ground in Houston and the astronauts up in space. And those astronauts right now are the crew of Expedition 32, being led by veteran Russian cosmonaut Gennady Padalka in the front row on the right there. Joining him also, starting on the left, is Japan Aerospace Exploration astronaut Aki Hoshide. There in the front, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko, and then moving along across the right, NASA astronaut Sonny Williams, another NASA astronaut Joe Akaba, and all the way in the back right there is our third Russian cosmonaut Sergei Revin. Major tasks on board the station, including quite a bit of robotic activity. Ground teams today use the space station's robotic manipulator arm to extract the exposed pallet out of the Japanese HTV vehicle. HTV being a unmanned cargo craft which docked with the International Space Station just a little bit over a week ago on July 27th, carrying a haul of both pressurized and unpressurized cargo to the International Space Station. This external pallet coming out of the unpressurized system being taken out by teams on the ground with the station robotic arm and handed off to the Japanese Experiment Module Remote Manipulator System, or the GEM RMS. Then following this handoff, astronauts Aki Hoshide and Joe Akaba then grappled and installed the external pallet onto the GEM exposed facility, an exposed pallet on the outboard portion of the Japanese experiment module, which allows different payloads to be exposed to the vacuum and radiation environment of deep space. Aside from that work going on throughout the day today, Joe Akaba was also working with the binary colloidal alloy test, also known as BCAT, which is an experiment that looks to study particles known as colloids, as they're suspended in different plasmas to help offer a few more insights into basic particle physics, taking advantage of that microgravity environment on board the International Space Station. And Akaba's partner on all of that robotic activity earlier today, Aki Hoshide, was getting involved in a Japan Aerospace and Exploration Agency biological experiment, starting up some measurements for biorhythms, which looks to examine the effect of long-term microgravity exposure on automatic cardiac functions, and uses 24-hour electrocardiograms on these ISS crew members. Our third USOS crew member, Sonny Williams, has been setting up and charging a couple of batteries for different power tools, or Makita batteries, for some upcoming integrated cardiovascular monitoring she'll be doing throughout the week. Integrated cardiovascular, a U.S. study similar to that biorhythms JAXA experiment that Aki Hoshide is working on, which looks to study the atrophy or the weakening of the heart muscle during long-duration spaceflight. She'll also be working to set up a modification kit and installing that on the station's recycling tank. Meanwhile, our three Russian cosmonauts, starting off with Commander Gennady Padalka, who is inside of the Russian service module, or Zvezda, installing the Core's P antenna, the passive manual antenna switch. The Core's P is the receiving end of that automated docking system, which controls the Progress spacecraft on their final approach into the International Space Station. And aside from setting up that switch today, he'll be doing some cargo transfer from the 48 Progress vehicle, which docked just a little over a week ago. He'll also be updating the station's inventory management system, along with Yuri Malenchenko, who is also going to be giving him a hand with that cargo transfer from the 48 Progress vehicle. And he will also be doing some leak checks on ATV, which is the third unmanned cargo craft currently docked to the station, quite a bit of visiting vehicles interacting with this station complex right now. ATV-3 all the way in the back there on the aft end of Zvezda. It's been attached to the station the longest out of the three unmanned craft, ATV, Progress, and HTV. So he'll be doing a couple of leak checks on that with its undocking scheduled in the near future. Then our third and final Russian cosmonaut, Sergei Revin, is going to be doing some routine replacements on the Russian toilet system and also replacing a few lights inside of the Zvezda service module and the Rassvet docking module.
Ist von der Mars-Sonde Curiosity. Der Forschungsroboter hat seit seiner Landung gestern auf dem roten Planeten bereits eine Menge Datenmaterial an die Erde gesendet. Darunter sind einige Fotos sowie ein kleines Video vom Landeanflug. Ins Visier genommen hat Curiosity, was übersetzt Neugier heißt, einen mehr als 5000 Meter hohen Berg. Außerdem zeigen die Bilder den Marsboden an der Landestelle mit vielen kleinen Kieseln. Der Roboter soll noch 2 Jahre lang nach Hinweisen suchen, ob es früher auf dem roten Planeten Leben gegeben haben könnte.
Knapp einen Tag nach der Landung des Roboterfahrzeugs Curiosity gibt es nun erste Bilder und ein Video vom roten Planeten. Der Laie erkennt darauf wahrscheinlich nicht sehr viel, aber auch dieser unscharfe Film von der Landung auf dem Mars versetzt die Wissenschaftler schon in Freudentaumel. Und auch die Fotos, die Curiosity aus 250 Millionen Kilometern Entfernung zur Erde funkt, da erkennt der Laie schon deutlich mehr, lösen Begeisterung aus.
Well, good morning from the PAO console here in Mission Control Houston for today's International Space Station update. Right now, the Orbit 2 team is on console monitoring all of the systems on board this orbiting laboratory. Today's team is being led by Flight Director Mike Lammers, and at the Capcom position is Jeremy Hansen, serving as the communication link between controllers here on the ground and the astronauts up in space. And those astronauts right now are the crew of Expedition 32, being led by Russian cosmonaut and veteran space flyer Gennady Padalka, currently on his 4th space flight. And then starting on the left, we'll go across the back row with Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. Then joining him on the front row there is Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko on his 5th flight, another veteran space flyer from the Russian Space Agency. Moving across the back row, NASA astronaut Sunny Williams on her 2nd long-duration space flight. And then right next to her, another NASA astronaut, Joe Akaba, veteran of one previous space shuttle mission. And then finally, all the way on the right there, is our 3rd Russian cosmonaut, Sergei Revin, a rookie flyer on his 1st flight on board the International Space Station. So the crew quite busy today. They all just finished up reviewing some emergency procedures. Just in case there's an ammonia release inside of the station's atmosphere, they walked through their emergency handbooks and conferred with teams on the ground the different steps that they would have to take should such a situation arise. That was all completed successfully, and the crew members were led by Expedition 32 Commander Gennady Padalka, who also today was reviewing some procedures for his upcoming spacewalk, which will be occurring on Monday, August 20th. This will be the 31st Russian spacewalk, or EVA, extravehicular activity in support of the International Space Station. He'll be stepping outside with fellow Russian cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko and relocating the Strela 2 telescoping boom from the Pirs docking compartment to the Zarya module in preparation for the future undocking of Pirs, which will pave the way for the new Russian multi-purpose laboratory module just a little bit later in 2013 or 2014. So again, spacewalkers Gennady Padalka and Yuri Malenchenko reviewing those procedures today. Our 3rd Russian cosmonaut, Sergei Revin, is auditing some supplies of spare lighting equipment inside of the Russian segment. He spent some time yesterday replacing a few lights on the Zvezda and Rassvet modules on the Russian side of the house. He'll also be doing some routine maintenance activities on different Russian life support systems, pending a few ground recommendations on which exactly he'll be working on, whether it's the oxygen generation system in the Russian segment or also doing some more routine toilet replacement work. Moving on to our USOS crew members, Joe Akaba spent a good portion of his day today working in the combustion integrated rack. He's been replacing some hardware in the multi-user droplet combustion apparatus. That combustion integrated rack includes a number of different components like a combustion chamber and also fuel and oxidizer controls and 5 different cameras for performing combustion experiments safely in microgravity. His fellow NASA astronaut Sunny Williams is doing some work on the extravehicular mobility unit, or the spacesuits that our U.S. astronauts wear during their own spacewalks in preparation for her upcoming EVA, or spacewalk outside of the station, alongside with Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. That's scheduled to take place on August 30th, and that will see the two astronauts step outside to replace a failing main bus switching unit, which is a vital portion of the station's electrical power system, working to act as a distribution hub to route the power to the different station systems. It first showed indications of a failure back in October of 2011, so they'll be stepping outside to get on the station's truss, which is basically the backbone portion of the station, and replace that failing switching unit. And then if time permits, they'll also be rerouting some cables for that upcoming Russian multi-purpose laboratory module in the future, and maybe installing a few debris and thermal covers as well, and the pressurized mating adapter too. Then her fellow spacewalker Aki Hoshide today, not doing any EVA preps just yet, but he was taking some water samples from the environmental health system inside of the station's water recovery system, specifically from the total organic carbon analyzer, which looks to analyze the level of carbon in the astronauts' drinking water. It's constantly monitored for different potential contaminants and other things of the like. And other than that, he'll also be unstowing some unnecessary hardware from the airlock, actually in preparation for the upcoming EVA procedure. And aside from all of these crew activities today, controllers down on the ground continuing some of the robotic work that's been taking place this week. They were using the Special Purpose Dexterous Manipulator, or Dexter, today to transfer the space communications and navigation, or SCAN, payload off of the external pallet, which was unloaded from the HCV-3 vehicle yesterday, and they're transferring that to the External Logistics Carrier 3. And a little bit later today, we'll perform a space test program payload survey, and then stow Dexter back on the Mobile Bay Station port number 2.
Good morning, this is Mission Control Houston. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's edition of ISS Update this Wednesday, August 8th. We're coming to you live inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room, where the team here has been monitoring the systems aboard the station and supporting the day's activities of the Expedition 32 crew members. Leading the Orbit 2 team here in the Station Flight Control Room today is Flight Director Greg Whitney. Whitney is in the certification flow after recently being named Flight Director. He has supported space station activities as an operations planner and space shuttle missions as a flight activities officer, and supported 14 space station expeditions and 12 space shuttle missions. Next to him, serving as Capcom today, is Anna Fisher. She's relaying all ground messages up to the crew. The 6 members aboard the station include Russian cosmonaut and commander of the complex, Gennady Padalka, and flight engineers cosmonaut Sergei Revin, NASA astronaut Joe Akaba, cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko, NASA astronaut Sunny Williams, and Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. Malenchenko, Williams, and Hoshide arrived at the International Space Station aboard their Soyuz TMA-05M. They docked to the Rossviet module on July 16th, and they are now in the middle of their 4th week in space. Meanwhile, Padalka, Revin, and Akaba launched to the orbiting complex aboard their Soyuz 04M spacecraft as the Expedition 31 crew in May. Their vehicle docked to the Poisk module of the space station 2 days after their launch on May 14. Today, they will complete their 87th consecutive day in space. The space station with its crew aboard is flying at an altitude of about 251 statute miles. The orbiting facility on a northeastern track just made its way across Pakistan and Afghanistan and is now crossing over China and eventually Mongolia. After the crews wake up at 1 a.m. Central Time this morning, the Expedition 32 crew participated in the first of 2 daily planning conferences with the ground controllers at mission control centers around the world to review today's activities. Station Commander Padaka began his day working to collect spacewalk tools, then participated in a study of bioelectric activity. He and Malenchenko worked together to prep the Russian Orlan spacesuits. That is currently what they are working on now for the next Russian spacewalk, when Padaka and Malenchenko will venture outside the complex on August 20th. Malenchenko and flight engineer Sonny Williams transferred U.S. spacewalk tools to the Russian segment for use on the upcoming spacewalk. Williams is now working on a session with a Lego bricks study that uses the common Lego bricks to demonstrate simple science concepts and how construction works differently in a microgravity environment. She had earlier this morning participated in a VO2 Max session. VO2 Max studies the microgravity effects on a crew member's aerobic capacity. And Williams, Malenchenko, and Commander Padaka will later review the DUG, or the Dynamic Onboard Ubiquitous Graphics, for the upcoming spacewalk on the Russian segment outside the orbiting complex. That system, DUG, or application, is a visual simulation software that is used for spacewalk planning and the review of station robotic arm operations. Meanwhile, flight engineer Joe Akaba kicked off the day with more binary colloidal alloy testing, or the BCAT C1 research that looks at particles or colloids that are suspended in liquid. It focuses specifically on the effects of microgravity on phase separation. That is, phase separation is seen with oil and water here on Earth. This research may lead to better material processes. Akaba then will assist Williams in recording the Lego brick exercise later during this update hour. And a little before the hour, Akaba also took some time out to talk with reporters of WAPA-TV of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and also Univision. Meanwhile, flight engineer Aki Hoshide is performing several medical experiments now. He also then checked out the Cardiolab leg arm cuff system, and will spend some time troubleshooting the nanostep circuit. By the day's end, each crew member will have completed their daily 2 hours of exercise to help mitigate the negative effects of long-duration spaceflight on their bodies and maintain their physical health. They will do some prep work for the next day, and also will participate in their last daily planning conference of the day before their evening meals and pre-sleep period. The crew is now scheduled to go to bed at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control Houston.
So hat der Rover Curiosity jetzt auch sein erstes Panoramafoto vom Mars geschickt und die Wissenschaftler sind begeistert, denn auf dem Schwarz-Weiß-Bild sind Hügel am Horizont zu erkennen. Zuvor hatte der Forschungsrover schon Bilder von der Landestelle gesendet. Der Hitzeschutz liegt etwa 1 Kilometer, die Kapsel, der Kran und der Fallschirm rund 600 Meter entfernt. Und mithilfe dieser Aufnahmen wollen die Wissenschaftler jetzt entscheiden, in welche Richtung sie Curiosity nun genau rollen lassen.
Curiosity rover on Mars. Well, later on Thursday, the US Space Agency expects to receive the first colour panorama from the planet. Well, you can find many of these images on the Curiosity rover's Twitter account, but these pictures have an important use as well. Remember, there's a 14-minute communication delay between Earth and Mars. Now, if the rover was driven by remote control, Curiosity could drive over a cliff by the time NASA even sees it. So operators use these pictures to plan its path for the next day. It really is quite amazing, isn't it? Well, that is Newsstream, but the news certainly continues here at CNN. Well, Business Today is coming up next.
Good morning, this is Mission Control Houston. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's edition of ISS Update this Thursday, August 9th. For those of you joining us now, we're coming to you live inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room, where the team has been monitoring the systems and the crew's activities aboard the International Space Station. This is the crew of Expedition 32. Leading the Orbit 2 team here in the Station Flight Control Room today is Flight Director Greg Whitney, seen standing here in this scene in the blue shirt, and next to him is Capcom Anna Fisher, who is relaying all ground messages up to the crew. Meanwhile, the 6 crew members aboard the station include Russian cosmonaut and commander of the complex, Gennady Padalka, and flight engineers cosmonaut Sergei Revin and NASA astronaut Joe Akaba, shown here on the right-hand side. Padalka, Revin, and Akaba had launched to the orbiting complex aboard their Soyuz spacecraft as the Expedition 31 crew in May. Their vehicle docked to the Poisk module of the space station 2 days after their launch on May 14, and today they will complete their 88th consecutive day in space. Joining them there on the left-hand side is cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko, NASA astronaut Sunny Williams, and Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. Malenchenko, Williams, and Hoshide arrived at the International Space Station after docking their Soyuz spacecraft to the Rassvet module on July 16th. They're now in the middle of their 4th week in space. The space station with its crew aboard is flying at an altitude of about 250 statute miles. The orbiting facility is on a eastern track. It had just come across the southern tip of Brazil and is about to swing a northeastern track across the South Atlantic Ocean for an eventual pass over Africa. The Expedition 32 crew kicked off their day early this morning at 1 a.m. Central Time. They followed that by the first of their 2 daily planning conferences with ground controllers at mission control centers around the world to review today's activities. Today, aboard the orbiting complex, more robotics work takes center stage as flight engineers Joe Akaba and Aki Hoshide work together using the Japanese robotic arm, also known as the Remote Manipulator System, that is anchored at the Japanese Experiment Module, or Kibo, to unearth the multi-mission consolidated equipment from the exposed pallet and install it to the exposed facility unit number 8 of the Japanese Experiment Module's exposed facility. Just before today's update hour, Akaba and flight engineer Sunny Williams reviewed robotics procedures in advance of tomorrow's work to return that exposed pallet back into the Japanese HTV-3, the cargo vehicle. Then Williams and flight engineers Malenchenko and Hoshide will have a medical contingency drill a little after the hour. Williams also will spend some time with science. She'll work with the commercial generic bioprocessing apparatus. This is a small research facility that is used for biological experiments. Williams is working with the 6 YouTube Space Lab group activation pack experiments. She will also then work on the burning and suppression of solids experiment. This experiment examines the burning and extension of characteristics of a wide variety of fuel samples in the environment of microgravity. Akaba, Williams, and Hoshide will conduct visual testing prior to complete eye exams that are scheduled later next week. Akaba is currently working to clean filters of bacteria within nodes 1, 2, and 3, also known as the Unity, Harmony, and Tranquility. And earlier this morning, flight engineer Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide took some time out to talk with the Japanese Young Astronauts Club in Tokyo. And also today marks a special day for an honorary crew member aboard the space station, Smokey the Bear, who turns 68 today. Flight engineer Joe Akaba brought up a small plush Smokey Bear, seen here in this picture. He had served as the zero-G indicator aboard the Soyuz spacecraft that carried him up to the International Space Station back in May. The space station serves as a platform for studying Earth, natural and man-made changes, including the devastation of forest fires or wildland fires. Smokey also serves as a way to raise awareness about fire prevention and fire safety. We'll be talking with Jeff Miller of the U.S. Forest Service about its partnership with NASA in a few minutes here in Mission Control Houston. And meanwhile, aboard the orbiting laboratory, each crew member will have completed their daily 2 hours of exercise to help mitigate the negative effects of long-duration spaceflight on their bodies and also maintain their physical health. They will do some prep work for the next day, participate in their second daily planning conference before the evening meals and pre-sleep period. The crew is then scheduled to go to sleep at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control Houston. Hi, welcome inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room. We're doing this digital learning network, and we're talking to, I understand, 2nd to 9th grade students out at Space Camp at Kennedy Space Center. Space Camp is cool. This guy knows because he's been to Space Camp a few times. So our guest today is NASA astronaut Mike Fossum. He's been to space 3 times, twice aboard the Space Shuttle 121, 124, and then once aboard the International Space Station most recently, where he spent 167 days in space aboard Expedition 28, and he was the commander of Expedition 29, and he has conducted 7 spacewalks, and so he knows it all. So you guys, we're ready. Welcome, Mike, and thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Amika. It's great to be here. It's hard for me to believe that 1 year ago right now I was living on the space station for almost half a year. So great experience doing that, and it's great to be home now too.
And so we're ready for your questions.
My name is Ali, and I'm from Korea. And my most memorable moment was riding the multiple axis trainer.
What's your question?
And my question was that, what was my most memorable moment?
Okay, so your most memorable moment at Space Camp was riding the multiple access trainer. That thing is kind of crazy. I've ridden that multiple access trainer down there at Space Camp. For me, my most memorable moment, probably, there's a lot of them, but probably it was kind of similar to what you had, and it was coming home in the Soyuz spacecraft. Very different. The space shuttle came in and landed like a great big airliner, very smooth. Coming home in the Soyuz was a lot more exciting. It got you kind of twisted and tumbled around like you did on the trainer there, as the parachutes are opening, and it's kind of like whipping it around like a ball on the end of a string. And so that the multiple access trainer that you used actually was a very realistic kind of training for the dynamics that we felt when I came home just before Thanksgiving.
Great question. Next.
Hi, my name is Kaylin, and my question is, how do you feel about your job, and how long did it take to be an astronaut?
Oh, that's great. I love my job, and it has been a dream of mine since I was probably about your age. I was 12 years old when I really was laying on a hillside at night looking up at the stars, and I felt like we're not just looking at the stars, but we're in the stars. And that's when we were landing on the moon right at that time, and I said, you know what, I want to do that. And I would dream about doing that, and I never completely gave up on that dream as I continued through my high school and college education, and then different jobs along the way. So it did take me a lot of years. I applied multiple times, more than once, to be an astronaut before I was selected. But it was absolutely worth the hard work along the way, and I wasn't waiting. I didn't get selected the first, second, or even third time. But I wasn't waiting. I was working hard at the different jobs that I had, and trying to contribute to the space program in different ways until I was finally selected. And now I've really enjoyed it a lot. I'm very fortunate to have gone into space 3 times, and now I'm helping the people that are going into space, that are flying on the space station right now. We have 2 Americans, 1 Japanese, and 3 Russian living on the space station right now, and so I'm helping them out with their mission and getting the next crews ready to go. So I'm still enjoying my job a lot.
Great work, question. And so hard work and a little bit of patience pays off. Next question.
I'm Caleb. I'm from Roseburg, Oregon, and my question is, are you Are you glad that you did all the training so you could be an astronaut?
Oh, sure, Caleb. The training's a lot of work, and we call it a lot of work, but there's parts of it that are a lot of fun, too. Now, part of it's sitting in school, sitting in astronaut school, literally, where we have teachers that come in and teach us about the technical details in different systems, spacecraft systems. But then you get to not just learn about it, book learning, but you get to go and actually operate it in trainers, and maybe to learn how to you study in classroom about how the robotic systems works, and then you go work on trainers where you're moving simulated robotic arms, and then you go out into space where you're actually moving the robot arm to do different tasks. And so it's a great experience, and it definitely is worthwhile. And the training itself is a lot of fun too, because there's a lot of different things associated with it. I like to learn new things. I like to do new things, and so there's a lot of new things to learn and do.
Another good question. We're ready for the next one.
My name's Andy, and I'm from Pound Ridge, New York. And my question is, what parts make up the International Space Station?
Oh wow, Andy, that's a great question. The International Space Station is huge. It's longer and wider than a football field when you include the whole thing. And when you first look at it, I mean, probably one of the first things you see are these great big arrays, these panels that are out on the ends, and they look gold colored. And those are the part that grab sunlight and turn it into electricity. And those generate all the electricity that we need on the space station. And when the sun's shining on them, they make the electricity and they charge up some batteries. So when we're in the Earth's shadow, we're using that electricity from the batteries to keep things going. And then you see the can parts. They look like individual pieces of like silver cans that go together to make the pressurized parts of the space station. And that's where we live and work. And those individual cans, and they were sized, most of them were sized to fit in the cargo bay of the space shuttle. And so they filled up that cargo bay of the shuttle, and the shuttles would go up to the station, and we'd add a new piece. And those pieces are laboratories, they're living modules. One of them, we kind of call it our gymnasium module because it has a lot of our exercise equipment and some stowage and stuff in there. So that's probably the biggest stuff that makes it up. There's all the things you have like at home. We have a bedroom. It's real small, and you sleep on the wall because you don't need much room. And so that's the biggest things you see when you look at the space station. Good question.
Hi, my name is Jiley. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And my favorite thing was the space shuttle simulation. And my question is, what kind of conversations do you have on the ISS?
Oh, what kind of conversation do we have on the ISS? Well, there's several different answers to that because, like I said, right now we have crew members from 3 different countries that are living up there. 2 Americans, 1 Japanese, and 3 Russians. And so, one thing is which language are we talking in while we're up there? And it tends to be a combination of English and Russian. Because that's just the strongest languages for the crew mix on board. Yesterday, Joe Acaba, who is of Puerto Rican descent, did an interview in Spanish, which was really a lot of fun. So he was able to reach out to a large community of people in their native tongue. We talk about work. The things we talk about are kind of the same things you talk about there. We're living with these people for up to half a year at a time. So we talk about work, we talk about school, we tell old funny stories from when we were in training together, or old stories of what it was like growing up in the United States, or growing up in Russia, or growing up in Canada, and comparing all those different kind of experiences and getting to know your crewmates better.
And it is truly an international. Today, we just had an interview with Aki Hoshide, and he did it in Japanese.
Right.
And the crew aboard have been watching the Olympics.
Oh yeah, and then the Olympics are another thing that really draws the whole world together as we're all cheering for the athletes, cheering for our home country, of course, but appreciating the great efforts of everybody.
Yep, absolutely. Good question. Next.
My name is Colleen, and I come from Fairfield, Connecticut. And my question is, how did you put the ISS into orbit?
Oh boy, how did we put the ISS into orbit? If you look at it now, it's over 900,000 pounds, and it's kind of hard to even think about what it takes to put this thing into orbit, because we couldn't put this huge space station on top of a great big monster huge rocket and launch it all at once. And so we actually launched it piece by piece. It took many space shuttle launches, about 27, I don't remember exactly how many space shuttle launches, to carry up individual pieces, as well as the Russian parts of the space station went up their own way. They launched the piece of space station on top of a rocket, and then theirs automatically go up and attach to it. And so we took it up one piece at a time until we got the whole thing built up there.
Right. And you actually flew aboard 2 of the space shuttles. And do you recall any of the items that you brought up? And you also
Well, the biggest one we brought up was on my second space shuttle flight. We brought up the main Japanese laboratory. Yep. And so it was one of the largest single elements on the space station. It pretty much filled up the cargo bay of the shuttle. And so we went up with that in the back of the space shuttle, and we attached the space shuttle to the station. And then we did some spacewalks to prepare the laboratory to install it, and also to prepare the space station, because it's not quite as easy as just plugging Legos together. Sometimes it looks kind of simple as we plug models together in different ways, but it's all very complicated, and it has to be done just right. Because once we attach that laboratory up there 4 years ago, we wanted to make sure that it was perfectly clean, because it's never going to come off again. So it needs to work for the next 20 years. So it's a great challenge, and one of the amazing things was it all worked. It worked out really well. Thank you.
Very good question. Next question.
My name is Caitlin, and I'm from Martinsburg, West Virginia. Have you had any emergencies or close calls on the ISS, and what were they?
Yes, occasionally we do. We train for a lot of different things, of course, so we train for lots of different kinds of emergencies. We haven't had any that were real scary. We trained for fires. We have not had a real fire. We trained for leaks the air's leaking out, and we're okay there. We do train also for spilling things, because on the ground, if you spill something bad, something really nasty or toxic as we call it, it falls to the floor, and you might have a mess to clean up, but it's not that big a deal. But if you spill some acid or something in space, well, then it's floating and it can get in your eyes, get in your lungs and stuff, so that's much more serious. And so anything that we spill that can irritate your eyes or cause trouble, so not quite an emergency, but it's something that we take very seriously. We do occasionally, we have to move the space station, because there's a piece of space junk. Usually it's a piece of an old satellite or something that's orbiting up there, and we're orbiting together, and sometimes we get so close that we're in danger of getting hit by this stuff. And so we have to maneuver, we have to ignite the space station engines and do a little bit of an orbit change to get out of its way. And we do that about every couple of months.
My name is Kelvin. I'm from Michigan. And what is your emergency plan if an asteroid or a meteorite comes at the space station?
Okay, Kelvin. The emergency plan, the first step you do is we have a big team of people on the planet who are tracking all of these different things out there, like asteroids and comets and stuff, and pieces of satellites and rockets that are in orbit. They're tracking this stuff, and they use computer programs to predict where it's going to be in the next days and weeks ahead. And so we know we know ahead of time if it's going to come close, and that's why we would change our orbit. Now, it's possible that we could get hit by something that is too small to track, and that's one of the things we train for, and I think that's what you're getting at. So it's possible that we could get hit. Now, if we get hit by a comet, well, that's going to be bad. That's so big, that's going to be really bad. But the more likely thing is we would get hit by something that could punch a hole in part of the station, and we would get all of the people together and move away from the part of the station that's leaking and get that sealed off. once we get everybody safe, well, then we will work with everybody on the ground and on orbit to figure out what we do next. And that will depend on a lot of details about exactly how big of a hole it is or what kind of damage it caused. But we have a lot of plans we hope we never need to use for how to make repairs or recover from those kind of situations. But the first step is keep the people safe and get them as safe as possible. So, good.
Very good question. I think we still have some time for more. Next question.
Hey, my name is Alex from Virginia. My question is, what's the worst situation that you've been in?
Okay, Alex, the worst situation I've been in was probably during my space station mission last June. There was a piece of junk that they identified, space debris, that was they identified its track as coming close to us. Too late for us to do the maneuver away from it. And so what we had to do was close all of the hatches on the station and kind of get into our Russian Soyuz spacecraft, and that's kind of our emergency way home. And so we got into our Soyuz spacecraft and closed the hatch and then waited to make sure we didn't get hit, because they don't know exactly where these things are going. They don't have, especially when they're small, and so there's enough uncertainty about it, and there's enough risk associated with it that we call it hunkering down or shelter in place. And so we did that. So that's, you worry a little bit as we sit there trying to listen and say, okay, do we hear anything? Do we hear any banging? And talking to the ground, and the ground confirmed that all of the pressures looked normal, and so we waited until the time passed and everything was normal, so we went back out and opened up all the hatches.
And
no
back
big
to
deal.
work.
Back to work.
Very good question. Next.
My name's Lena Reynolds. I'm from Sacramento, California. And I was wondering, how do you go about working and communicating with other countries to keep the International Space Station international?
It's communicating with the other countries and ground control teams and even astronauts is a challenge. Most of the communications that we do on the station are with English with most of the partner countries. So the Mission Control Center in Japan and Germany and Canada all work in English, and we communicate in English with them. When we're working with the Mission Control in Moscow, we work in Russian. And so, and that's just kind of the nature of the language abilities in different places and stuff. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes. And when I'm talking to one of my Russian crewmates, for instance, it's kind of funny. It drives my wife crazy, because I can have a conversation with one of my buddies where I'm speaking English and he understands my English well enough to understand what I'm saying, but he doesn't understand English well enough to answer me. So he'll answer me in Russian, and I understand him just fine, and then I might answer him in English, maybe a mix of English and Russian. And so it's kind of funny to listen to us talk, because we're perfectly comfortable after living together for so long, having a conversation like that.
And so an astronaut who does fly aboard the International Space Station does go through some language training, and so they learn Russian.
Oh yes, yeah, learning Russian is a requirement to learn enough to get by. And so it's actually one of the joys of it, because it's so different from the other stuff I've done throughout my career, which is focused mostly on engineering work and system development. And so now trying to use a different part of my brain to learn another language. It's very challenging, but very rewarding too, to be able to now go around another country and speak in their language and have that kind of freedom is really great. And I think a lot of people, a lot of Americans would benefit more from learning languages so they could enjoy other cultures.
Absolutely.
You don't really understand another culture until you understand some of its language.
That's right, absolutely. So if you guys are interested in learning something, even language or something like that, we encourage you to go after that.
You bet.
That was a good question. Next question.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That was the last of the student questions, but I was wondering before you go, can you explain how you can go from a space camp student to being like an astronaut or an engineer or someone working at NASA?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Oh, I know that all the students there at Space Camp are having a great time. It's just a wonderful experience, and you get exposed to so many different things because there are so many things to the space business, whether you're in mission control, where we're sitting right now, or one of the laboratories around here helping develop new space systems for the future, or an astronaut in training in other buildings around the center here or around the world. And as the students can see from their time at Space Camp, there's a lot of different things associated with this. They have things there where they can learn about neutral buoyancy, where they can learn about different kinds of engineering, where they can learn about different space science things like geology, planetary geology, comparing the geology of the Earth to that of the Moon. And now we have a new tool to learn more about the geology and the history of Mars. And all of these things are part of the body of knowledge that we're working on putting together. On the space station, we do experiments in materials, on human bodies, on chemistry, on combustion. Lots and lots of different kinds of experiments in science go into the work we're doing on the space station. So for the students today, check it all out. And when you're doing some of these different things and something really lights you up and you say, wow, that is so cool, well, go learn more about it. Go study more about it. When you get back to school in a few weeks, go ask your teachers about it. And maybe in the science classes or other things you can learn more. And a lot of you can find your future careers in these things that you learn at Space Camp where you go, wow, that's really cool. Go learn more about it, and that could end up being a college degree. It can be a career here at NASA, and there's people in the astronaut office have lots of different backgrounds, different kinds of engineering, sciences, mathematics, medicine, lots of backgrounds. Astronauts can have many different kinds of backgrounds, and there's no one background that's better than the others. The important thing is what you really like. So follow your passion, find those things that really interest you, and go learn more about it, and study hard, and be one of the best, because that's what we're looking for, is people that stand out as some of the best at what they do. And they're the best at it if they really love it right here, just as much as they love it up here. Have fun.
And be sure to thank your teachers and your mentors, because they're there for you to help you learn all those wonderful things. And you have it here, Explore to Explore. Mike Fossum, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks,
Any other questions before we cut out?
No, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, guys, enjoy Space Camp.
Thank you. Bye. Mission Control Houston.
Want to get right to some of the, you're going to be running the Falmouth Road Race up there, and you're also doing a triathlon. Being in space for a prolonged period of time, tough on your body, so in an effort to combat those negative effects, that's really why you want to be doing this triathlon in space. How's the training going? When is the triathlon? And how do you swim?
Well, I'm happy this time to be participating in the road race. It's just over 7 miles. It has a long history. This year's its 40th reunion, and also the triathlon with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and that's in September. So one in August and one in September. I've been up here for 2 weeks now. I've been working out on the bike, which is right in front of me, also the treadmill, which is around the corner, and the advanced resistive exercise device, which is a weightlifting machine based on vacuum that we're pushing against the vacuums in a canister. The ARED is new since I was here last time. The treadmill is a new treadmill with a wider base. So those two pieces of equipment are huge upgrades since I was here last time rather. And so we've been working out on those two pieces of equipment pretty heavily. I'm doing an interesting exercise protocol. It's an experiment. It's called Sprint. And so it does have us doing sprints on the treadmill and pretty much trying to max out on your lifting. So for this first 2 weeks, it's been tough. Microgravity is nice to your body. You can float around. It feels good. But when you simulate gravity, when you're on either the treadmill or the ARED, it sort of hurts, and so it's been a bit of an adjustment to get into the exercise. But I think by a couple weeks for the road race, I'll be ready. I've ran up to 5 miles continuously now, and I think I'll be ready for the triathlon for sure.
Well, that's a perfect transition, being physically ready, because you and I also have decided to do this triathlon together. mid-September, the Malibu Nautica Triathlon. You're going to do it in space. I'm going to do it on Earth. And again, it was one of the most fascinating things for me to watch you train on Earth. And you've done the Boston Marathon before from space, back in 2007, I believe. How is your training going? What's it like up there?
Well, you know, the adaptation is great for space. You know, up here everything feels a little bit easier. You know, you just saw Aki floating by. It just takes one hand to move yourself. But then when you start simulating gravity, when you get on the treadmill, you have a harness on that's pulling you down, or you get on the weightlifting machine and you're actually doing squats and deadlifts against a weight based on vacuum, it hurts. So this first 2 weeks we've sort of used as just get used to the equipment, get used to the protocols that we're doing. So I think we're at that point that we're finally adapted and ready to start building on it. So just watch out, because I'm ready to really start preparing for the triathlon. And watching the Olympics up here has been really motivating to turn us all into really good athletes.
Right. No, I better watch what I say here. If I get beat by you up in space, but you are going 17,000 miles an hour, so you do have that going for you. You have the bike, I believe, right? I mean, can you just quickly show us how you do this?
Sure. I was talking about the bike when you were visiting us before, because luckily here in space, we don't need a seat. All we do is put our feet in the pedals, and I'll demonstrate here. You're sort of ready to go.
So
you don't have to sit down. You just start.
This is amazing. You're really.
We have a machine here, a computer that we can program in the amount of resistance.
And station, this is Houston ACR. Check that your mic is on.
Sorry about that. In the floating, it got turned off. So we also have a computer here that we can dial in the resistance and the speed, and then we also, just for health purposes, take our heart rate as we're riding. And so we can, this is how I'm going to simulate the bike ride. So for the hills, I can increase my resistance to match the route that you're going to take, because I would assume that Malibu is not flat like Houston, right?
Not flat, right. So I want you to increase that resistance quite high, I think, for this. Does it, I don't know if you can still hear me, Sonny, but does it, you were saying you had to just get used to doing this. Does it hurt your knees? Because you don't have, like, you think about having some gravity to help force your legs through the revolutions riding a bike. I mean, does it hurt the joints when you're doing it this way?
No, you know, surprisingly enough, the bike for me is really good for your thighs and also cardiovascular. As soon as I start increasing the resistance on the bike, I think the cardiovascular part sort of starts to take over for me. So that, you know, the knees are not a problem at all. I think we get a really good knee and leg workout all for our joints, particularly our hips, our knees, and our ankles on the advanced resistive exercise device, and that's what that's made for. You know, up here, of course, we lose muscle mass and bone density just instantaneously as every day, because we're not under the influence of gravity, and so we definitely need some type of loading on those parts of our body. And the ARED does that, and also the treadmill does that as you as you run, and then you come down and put your foot flat on the treadmill as you're running. So both of those things are good for the bone mass and the muscle mass and bone density. But this guy for sure is good for cardiovascular.
A NASA prototype explodes during a test flight at Kennedy Space Center today, and it's caught on camera. Nobody was hurt, but it will no doubt be an expensive malfunction.
West 2's Dan Billow joins us now live from Kennedy Space Center. And Dan, do NASA officials know what went wrong?
Well, they haven't said very much about that yet. In fact, Martha, we're waiting for a little informal news conference that should start any minute. Built on a shoestring, this Morpheus lander, as it's called, was intended to show how to land on another planet in the future. Now they'll have to build a new one. The lander got only a few feet off the ground before it lost control. It burned for several minutes, its fuel tanks compromised. A brief NASA statement says the unmanned remote control lander suffered a hardware component failure. That's another way of saying something broke. This is the way Morpheus is supposed to fly. Its previous tests, most of them in Houston, have been on a tether, so it couldn't crash. But engineers had determined it was finally ready for its first free flights here at the Kennedy Space Center. But the crash will end that for the time being. Morpheus was intended to fly over a crater and boulder-strewn obstacle course at the end of the shuttle runway to test ways for a lander to automatically avoid obstacles in future landings on Mars, the Moon, or asteroids. This was intended to be its very first free flight. They had tried this on Tuesday, but the engine cut off right before they were going to take off. It was just going to be a short hop, and it turned out to be an extremely short hop. At 6 o'clock, a look at how engineers built this contraption. It is a $2 million project, relatively inexpensive by NASA standards. We're live at the Kennedy Space Center. Dan Billow, West 2 News.
Das erste Panoramafoto des Mars-Rovers Curiosity in Farbe zeigt eine hügelige Landschaft. Und die ist bunter, als die Forscher gedacht haben. Sie erkennen in den farblichen Abstufungen Sanddünen und verschiedene Gesteinsarten. Auf der Erde hingegen erlebte die NASA eine Panne. Der Testflug dieser unbemannten Mondlandefähre im Kennedy Space Center in Florida endete mit einer Explosion.
Die Wissenschaftler bei der NASA freuen sich weiter über die Erfolge ihrer jüngsten Mars-Mission. Der Roboter Curiosity hatte am Montag eine perfekte Landung auf dem roten Planeten hingelegt. Jetzt schickte er ein farbiges Rundum-Panorama von seinem Aufenthaltsort ans Kontrollzentrum in Kalifornien. Was das für die NASA bedeutet, berichtet Ulf Röller.
Gestochen scharf ist das erste Farbfoto, das der Mars-Rover Curiosity an die Erde gesendet hat. Es zeigt Sanddünen und Gesteinsbrocken. Der Roboter hat seinen drehbaren Kameramast ausgefahren. Er arbeitet fehlerfrei. Unsere Firma ist klein. Wir haben 4 dieser Farbkameras gebaut und jetzt sind 2 im Einsatz. Ich bin völlig überwältigt. Der Rover Curiosity ist ein rollendes Labor, das viel mehr kann als seine Vorgänger. Mit modernster Technik analysiert er Gestein und die Atmosphäre. Die Mission soll unter anderem klären, ob es auf dem Mars mal Leben gegeben hat oder vielleicht noch geben könnte. Wir können eine unglaubliche Landschaft erkennen. Es ist der richtige Ort für unsere Forschung. Es sieht dort aus wie in den Wüsten Kaliforniens. Ein Ziel hat der Rover fest im Blick, den mehr als 5000 Meter hohen Berg Mount Sharp. Knapp 2 Jahre erforscht Curiosity noch den roten Planeten.
Mal gestochen scharf und in Farbe.
Farbe heißt hier in Rot-Braun eben, passend natürlich zum roten Planeten, dem Mars. Die 360-Grad-Aufnahme wurde aus vielen einzelnen Bildern zusammengesetzt und die Forscher sind begeistert. Die Fotos zeigen Sanddünen und verschiedene Arten von Gestein und Sand.
Und da kein Marsmensch.
Ja, noch nicht mal eine Marsmaus, aber trotzdem beeindruckend. Der Mars ist immerhin rund 250 Millionen Kilometer von der Erde entfernt. Nochmal 250 Millionen Kilometer von der Erde entfernt.
Es gilt als das bisher spektakulärste Bildmaterial vom roten Planeten. Bereits kurz nach der Landung am Sonntag hatte Curiosity Fotos geliefert, allerdings nur in Schwarz-Weiß.
Geröll inmitten einer Sandwüste. Und die Wissenschaftler geraten ins Schwärmen. Das ist die erste farbige Panoramaaufnahme, die der Mars-Rover zur Erde geschickt hat. Auch wenn sie den echten Farben auf dem roten Planeten wohl nur nahe kommen, die ersten Fotos belegen für die NASA, Curiosity ist auf dem richtigen Kurs. Die Kameras geben uns einen ersten Eindruck davon, wie das Terrain aussieht. Wir diskutieren jetzt, wie dieses Gestein, was wir dort sehen, entstanden sein könnte. Verblüfft sind die Experten über die Steine auf der Oberfläche des Roboters. Sie sind offenbar trotz der sanften Landung aufgewirbelt worden. Ein Hinweis darauf, dass Material auf dem Mars leichter ist als erwartet? Doch bevor das Hightech-Labor der Curiosity auch dazu mehr Fakten liefern kann, muss 2 Wochen lang jedes Gerät an Bord getestet werden. Curiosity benehme sich bisher tadellos, melden die Ingenieure im Kontrollzentrum stolz. Für die NASA steht viel auf dem Spiel. $2,5 Milliarden wird der Rover verschlingen. Auch deshalb werden die Wissenschaftler jedem neuen Bild, jeder neuen Überraschung vom Mars entgegenfiebern.
Das Roboter Curiosity hat, neugierig wie er ist, eifrig fotografiert und dieses Panoramabild erstellt, das er heute früh zur Erde schickte, wo es natürlich mit Begeisterung empfangen wurde. Die NASA-Wissenschaftler sind äußerst zufrieden mit ihrem Marserkunder. Er benehme sich tadellos, loben sie. Was auf den Fotos zu sehen ist und wie sie entstehen, erklärt Hildegard Wert.
Was wir bisher zu sehen bekamen, ist erst der Anfang, denn Curiosity hat nicht weniger als 17 Kameras an Bord. 12 davon sind die sogenannten Ingenieurkameras. Sie sollen helfen, den Weg durch die steinige Marslandschaft zu finden. Die ersten Schwarz-Weiß-Fotos haben diese sogenannten Hascams mit ihren Fischaugenobjektiven gemacht. Ein bisschen nachbearbeitet wird der Landeplatz sichtbar, eine flache, steinige Ebene. Kurz nach der Landung hat Curiosity den Mast ausgefahren. Darauf sitzen 4 weitere Navigationskameras. Die haben erst einmal nach unten geguckt. Räder und Roboterarm, alles ist bei der Landung heil geblieben. Nur ein paar Körnchen Marsgestein wurden hochgewirbelt. Die können dem Rover aus der Sicht der Ingenieure kaum gefährlich werden. Oben am Mast sitzen zusätzlich 2 hochauflösende Farbkameras. Sie haben heute die erste Panoramaaufnahme geschickt. Die Forscher sind begeistert vom Spiel der Farben am Rand des Gale-Kraters und vor allem von 4 Löchern im Boden rund um ihren Rover. Bei der Landung haben die Triebwerke dort die oberste Schicht des Marsbodens weggepustet. Ein Glücksfall für die Wissenschaft. Offensichtlich ist da härteres, felsiges Material unter einer Schicht von Schotter und Geröll. Und die ist jetzt weggefegt worden. Da können wir einen Blick unter die Oberfläche werfen. Bis zur Erde haben die Fotos vom Mars einen weiten Weg. Sie werden zuerst in der Kamera gespeichert und dann an den Bordrechner überspielt. Der funkt sie in die Mars-Umlaufbahn. Zu einem Satelliten der NASA, der den roten Planeten schon länger umrundet und die Daten schließlich zur Erde sendet. 2 Jahre hat Curiosity nun Zeit, den Mars zu erkunden. Die Forscher wollen ihn in die Berge schicken, dorthin, wo sie die interessantesten Sedimentschichten vermuten.
Und schauen auf den Mars. Das geht ja zurzeit. Der Mars Rover Curiosity schickt nämlich immer bessere Fotos vom roten Planeten. Unter anderem auch die ersten farbigen Panoramabilder. Eines von ihnen zeigt, wie Sie hier sehen, Sanddünen und verschiedene Formen und Arten von Sand und Gestein. Und die Forscher der NASA sind, wie wir natürlich, auch überrascht, wie sehr die Landschaft auf dem Mars auf der Erde ähnelt. Jetzt bekommt Curiosity dann auch erstmal ein neues Gehirn verpflanzt, sozusagen eine neue Software wird hochgeladen. Damit soll er dann losrollen und Experimente starten können. Das heißt, wir werden noch schöne Dinge zu sehen bekommen von diesem anderen Planeten.
Things are looking good. Coming up on entry. Vehicle reports entry interface. We are beginning to feel the atmosphere as we go in here. It is reporting that we are seeing G's on the order of 11 to 12 Earth G's. Tank reversal 2 is starting. We are now getting telemetry from Odyssey. We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. The parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. Heat shield has separated. We've found the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers descending. Standing by for batch shell separation. We are in powered flight. We're at an altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for sky crane. Sky crane has started.
Signal to Odyssey, remain strong.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
Got thumbnails.
The interest and reaction generated worldwide by Curiosity's trek to and landing on the red planet has been phenomenal. People in New York City's Times Square watched a giant screen and listened on Third Rock Radio to NASA television's coverage of the vehicle's 7-minute, 13,000 to 0 miles per hour plunge to the surface of Mars. NASA TV also had more than 1.2 million people watching on NASA.gov. That's twice the record set for the recent transit of Venus. The NASA website even made available a map to which organizations were able to post locations of viewing events around the globe. Of course, the prime hosts were NASA centers.
It's hard to send somebody to Mars, and hopefully we can do that one day, but you certainly want to know about Mars before you send someone there.
NASA planetary scientist Kelly Fast of NASA headquarters brought Curiosity's landing and mission into focus for visitors at a community festival in Palmdale, California, near Dryden Flight Research Center. There were also opportunities for the curious crowd of several hundred people to learn more about the capabilities of the Red Planet's newest rover through exhibits set up by Dryden. About 7,000 Bay Area space fans came out to the Ames Research Center early to grab a good spot on the lawn to watch NASA television's coverage of Curiosity's landing later that night on giant screens. There was plenty to keep them busy in the meantime, including hands-on activities and displays, plenty of food trucks, and more. Ames scientists were on hand to answer questions about the mission, and presentations were given by Center Director Pete Worden and other Ames researchers about the role of Ames in support of the MSL mission. Later that night, when the good news from Curiosity reached Earth, the crowd at Ames joined the JPL team in celebration.
It may have been early on the East Coast, but the visitor center at Goddard Space Flight Center was bursting with excitement as 350 people anxiously awaited to hear that the Mars rover Curiosity had landed safely on the Red Planet. The crowd erupted into cheers when word came down from Jet Propulsion Lab's control room that the rover was up and running on the Martian soil. In addition to watching the landing live, visitors also heard from scientists about the mission and specifically about Goddard's role in building SAM, or Sample Analysis at Mars. It's one of the instruments on board Curiosity that will be testing the soil and atmosphere for the building blocks of life. Visitors also had the opportunity to explore the visitor center, which included testing out an interactive video game that allows players to take their best shot at landing a rover on Mars.
At the Virginia Air and Space Center, the official visitor center at NASA Langley, about 250 people showed up for Mars Midnight Madness. The overnight event included Mars-related exhibits and information for those curious about the Mars Science Laboratory. As the time for the scheduled landing of Curiosity approached, people filed into the center's IMAX theater to catch the historic event on the big screen. The successful touchdown, an especially proud moment for Langley, whose contributions to the mission included the MSL Entry, Descent, and Landing Instrumentation, or MEDLEY, a group of 14 sensors in the heat shield used to monitor temperature and pressure during Curiosity's descent through the Martian atmosphere. The Glenn Research Center held several MSL Curiosity events in the Cleveland, Ohio area. On August 3rd, a group of the agency's social media fans were treated to a tour of several research facilities in the morning and participated in a multi-center NASA social hosted by JPL in the afternoon. 2 days later,
Hello, welcome. We are the world-famous rocket robots.
the center held a Spark Your Curiosity event at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History that featured discussions with Glenn subject matter experts and interactive activities. Later that evening, Summer of Innovation students participated in activities at the Great Lakes Science Center, Glenn's official visitor center.
We just succeeded one more time in raising the bar even higher. New technologies never invented or attempted before were created for this incredible journey.
With the harrowing descent through the Martian atmosphere in the past, the team of engineers and scientists working with Curiosity has turned its attention to the mission ahead, exploring the surface of the red planet for clues about the existence of life. Shortly after its landing, the rover began beaming back images taken by its Hazard Avoidance Cameras, or HAZCAMs. Higher resolution images will be used during future operations by the mission's navigators to help plan Curiosity's path of exploration as it sets out on a nearly 2-year prime mission to investigate whether the region ever offered conditions favorable for microbial life.
We've collected data across the entire Gale crater and the landing ellipse, and we've got stereo data and color imagery that have already been used to start looking at potential traverses.
We'd like to know definitively what minerals are in that soil. And so by analyzing it, we can get a better understanding of what the composition of the soil is, certainly where we've landed, and by inference maybe also globally, and through that get at one of the most global questions we could address.
Curiosity undergoes the most difficult planetary exploration mission ever conducted. It is enabled by a suite of 10 science instruments with a total mass 15 times as large as the science payloads on the Mars rovers Spirit and Opportunity. Some tools are the first of their kind on Mars, such as a laser to check the elemental composition of rocks from a distance. Curiosity will also use a drill and scoop at the end of its robotic arm to gather soil and powdered samples of rock interiors, which can then be sifted and parceled out to analytical laboratory instruments inside the rover.
With the spacecraft being as healthy as it is and the capability that it has, all our options are open for science.
Out at Edwards Air Force Base near the Dryden Flight Research Center, the remotely piloted X-48C aircraft successfully got its first flight under its aeronautical belt. The X-48C is an X-48B blended wing body aircraft that's been modified to evaluate the low speed, stability, and control of a low noise version of a possible future hybrid wing body design. The HWB design stems from NASA's N+2 Future Concepts studies under the agency's Environmentally Responsible Aviation Project. Hey, got a minute? That's how long the latest test firing of the J2X engine took at Stennis Space Center, as NASA continues development of the Space Launch System, America's next heavy-lift rocket that will carry humans deeper into space than ever before. The 60-second firing operated the engine at the primary and secondary levels in an effort to collect more data about the developmental engine. The J2X engine is being built by Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne for Marshall Space Flight Center. The Kennedy Space Center has been Googled. In celebration of the center's 50th anniversary, KSC and Google Maps with Street View are providing space enthusiasts with virtual tours of the cavernous Vehicle Assembly Building, Launch Pad 39A, and other unique facilities used to help launch humans to the moon and space shuttles to low Earth orbit. Earlier this year, a crew of 5 Google Street View personnel spent a week at the center collecting data and imagery. NASA's 3 space shuttles were still at Kennedy, so don't be surprised to see Atlantis and Endeavour in the Vehicle Assembly Building. To take the tour, go to Google Maps, navigate to Kennedy Space Center, and then switch to Street View.
The radiation belts are the first and perhaps the oldest discovery of the space age. Yet they remain a mystery simply because this is a very harsh environment.
Scientists and project managers discussed the upcoming mission of the Radiation Belt Storm Probes, a NASA twin spacecraft designed to study the extremes of space weather by studying the planet's Van Allen radiation belts on various scales of space and time.
We have broadcasting, both satellites, 24/7 space weather. This is going to get picked up by ground stations around the world.
Scheduled to begin with a pre-dawn launch August 23rd from the Kennedy Space Center, RBSP is part of NASA's Living with a Star program, which investigates the processes of hazardous space weather and its effect on space exploration.
Enthusiastic teachers from around the country recently gathered at NASA's Dryden Aircraft Operations Facility in Palmdale, California, to participate in NASA's Airborne Research Experiences for Educators and Students, or ARES. For 2 weeks, the educators focused on NASA's Earth science programs and flight research missions. In the first week, a dozen elementary and high school teachers discovered how to find NASA educational resources, learned about aircraft used for Earth observation and data collection, and discovered how engineers integrate specialized science instruments into aircraft for observing and monitoring terrestrial changes. An additional 14 educators from NASA's Explorer Schools program joined the ARES participants during the second week to participate in a simulated NASA ER-2 Earth science mission. The teachers compared imagery and data collected by science instruments from previous airborne missions to ground data and imagery obtained during a field site visit in Central California. Middle school science teacher Michael Octatai expressed confidence that the training, speakers, materials, and hands-on activities will give ARES attendees the tools to create effective education action plans.
We're able to actually look at abstract ideas and concepts that are normally on paper, and we actually had the opportunity to travel to different sites, actually conduct some research and do some hands-on experimentation.
35 years ago, on August 12, 1977, Enterprise, NASA's first space shuttle, experienced its first free flight at Edwards Air Force Base near Dryden Flight Research Center in California. This was one of 5 flight evaluations conducted at Edwards as part of the Space Shuttle Approach and Landing Test Program, jointly managed by the Johnson Space Center and Dryden. Enterprise had previously completed 8 captive carry flights, anchored on the back of a modified Boeing 747 Shuttle Carrier Aircraft, or SCA. These captive flights verified the orbiter systems and cleared the way for the shuttle's first free flight. On board Enterprise were astronauts Fred Hayes and Gordon Fullerton. Though Enterprise never flew in space, it proved the Space Shuttle orbiter could fly in the atmosphere and land like an unpowered glider. The famed orbiter recently went on public display at the Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum in New York City. And 50 years ago, between August 11th and 15th in 1962, the missions of the Soviet Vostok 3 and Vostok 4 spacecraft marked the first time that more than one manned spacecraft was in orbit at the same time. The cosmonauts aboard the 2 capsules, Andrei Nikolaev in Vostok 3 and Pavel Popovich in Vostok 4, also participated in the first ship-to-ship communications in space by contacting each other via radio.
Good day, this is Mission Control Houston. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's edition of ISS Update this Friday, August 10th. And now we are going to have a weekly recap to recap the activities of the busy crew aboard the International Space Station. We're now inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room, where the team has been monitoring the systems aboard the station and supporting the day's activities of the Expedition 32 crew members. The 6 crew members aboard the station include the Russian cosmonaut and commander of the complex, Gennady Padalka, and flight engineers cosmonaut Sergei Revin, NASA astronaut Joe Akaba, and cosmonaut Yuri Malenchenko, NASA astronaut Sonny Williams, and Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. Malenchenko, Williams, and Hoshide arrived at the International Space Station after docking their Soyuz spacecraft to the Rassvet module on July 16th. Today they complete their 4th week in space. Meanwhile, Padalka, Revin, and Akaba had launched to the orbiting complex aboard the Soyuz spacecraft as the Expedition 31 crew back in May. Their vehicle had docked to the Poisk module of the space station just 2 days after their launch, which was on May 14. And today they complete their 89th consecutive day in space. The space station with its crew aboard is flying at an altitude of about 260 statute miles. The orbiting facility is making a northeastern track, having just crossed over the southern tip of Brazil, and is now heading across the South Atlantic Ocean and eventually for a pass across Africa. And now let's look back for a week in space. On a Monday, controllers on the ground had commanded the space station's robotic arm to extract the exposed pallet from the slide slot on the Japanese H-2 transfer vehicle cargo craft. Again, that was on Monday. The station arm then handed the pallet off to the Kibo module's robotic arm under the control of Expedition 32 flight engineers Joe Akabe and Aki Hoshide. Akabe and Hoshide installed the pallet on Kibo's exposed facility. On Monday, Akabe also worked with the binary colloidal alloy test, the science payload. In this experiment, also known as BCAT-C1, station crew members photographed samples of the colloidal particles as they phase separate, like oil and water, and self-assemble into crystals that interact strongly with light. The results will help scientists develop fundamental physics concepts previously cloaked by the effects of gravity. And on Monday, Hoshide had participated in the Japanese experiment known as biorhythm, which measures a crew member's cardiac activity during long-duration stays in space. And Commander Gennady Padalka had installed the KURS-P antenna, the receiving antenna for the KURS automated rendezvous system that was used during Progress supply ship dockings in the Zvezda service module. He also transferred some cargo from the newly arrived Space Station Progress 48 vehicle. And on Tuesday, flight engineer Joe Akabe had focused his efforts on the Fluids and Combustion Facilities Combustion Integrated Rack, replacing hardware for the multi-user droplet combustion apparatus. Then on Tuesday, flight engineers Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide spent part of their day preparing for a spacewalk they will perform on August 30th. Williams cycled the positive pressure relief valves on the spacesuits she and Hoshide will wear during the excursion out to the station's truss to replace a failed main bus switching unit. This is a distribution hub for the station's power system, with a spare located on an external stowage platform. Hoshide meanwhile moved unneeded hardware out to the airlock to clean up the work area as spacewalk preparations continue. Also on Tuesday, Williams and Hoshide also had teamed up to record an educational video demonstrating how astronauts orient themselves in an environment where there is no gravity to point the way up or down. And Williams rounded out her day installing the electromagnetic interference filters on the Fluids Science Laboratory's video management unit, and had also set up equipment for the VO2 max experiment, which allows researchers on Earth to measure changes in the astronauts' aerobic capacity during a long-duration spaceflight. And then on Tuesday, on the Russian side of the house, Commander Padalka and Flight Engineer Malenchenko had studied procedures for their spacewalk they will conduct on August 20th to prepare the Pirs docking compartment for its replacement with the new laboratory and docking module. The spacewalkers will relocate the Strela 2 hand-operated crane from the Pirs docking compartment to the Zarya module. And on Wednesday, Expedition 32 crew remained busy preparing for those two spacewalks. The Russian spacewalk is scheduled again for August 20th, and the U.S. spacewalk is planned for August 30th. The crew members had spent time getting their spacewalk tools ready while reviewing procedures, and also had been checking out the Russian Orlan spacesuits for that first spacewalk that is again to occur on August 20th. Meanwhile, the 6 station crew members had time scheduled for ongoing science and routine maintenance. Williams had participated in the VO2 max experiment that measures an astronaut's aerobic capacity. She also fed spiders and swapped out their habitats for a YouTube experiment. And also on Wednesday, flight engineer Joe Acaba then assisted Williams for an educational demonstration with the Lego bricks. Acaba also downloaded data captured for the integrated cardiovascular experiment and replaced batteries in an express rack. He also then took time to speak with WAPA TV in Puerto Rico and the Spanish language television channel Univision. And on Thursday, flight engineers Aki Hoshide and Joe Acaba used the Kibo module's robotic arm to transfer the multi-mission consolidated equipment payload from the H-2 Transfer Vehicle 3, the external pallet, to the exposed facility on the exterior of the Japanese experiment module. Acaba was later joined by flight engineer Sunny Williams to review robotics procedures in advance of the external pallet's reinsertion into HTV3, which took place today. Williams then had worked with the burning and suppression of solids experiment on Thursday. That experiment examines the burning and extinction characteristics of a wide variety of fuel samples in microgravity. The experiment burning and suppression of solids, also known as BAS, will help to develop procedures and methods for extinguishing accidental fires in microgravity, and it'll also contribute to the design of fire detection and suppression systems in microgravity and on Earth. Also on Thursday, Commander Gennady Padalka and flight engineers Yuri Malenchenko and Sergei Revin worked in the Russian segment of the station, monitoring its systems and performing a variety of maintenance duties. They also participated in a Russian medical test called Sprut-2, which investigates the distribution and behavior of human body fluids in zero gravity. And later on Thursday, Hoshide had some time set aside to speak with the Young Astronauts Club in Tokyo during an in-flight event in the Kibo module. And today, Friday, August 10th, after a early morning wake-up at 1 a.m. Central Time, the Expedition 32 crew had kicked off their day, followed by the first of 2 daily planning conferences with the ground controllers at Mission Control Centers to review their activities. Flight engineers Joe Acaba and Sunny Williams had worked together to using the station robotic arm to return the exposed pallet back into the Japanese H-2 transfer vehicle. Prior to the crew's wake-up, the ground team had unberthed and handed off that exposed pallet from the Japanese experiment module's remote manipulator system, the Japanese robotic arm, to the station arm. Acaba then worked to remove the depress hose from the water recovery system to resume nominal urine processing assembly operations. That water recovery system converts urine, sweat, and condensation into drinkable water supply for the crew aboard the International Space Station. Acaba also spent some time working with the capillary flow experiment that studies how fluids move up surfaces in microgravity. Meanwhile, flight engineer Sunny Williams took photos of that experiment. She also performed some medical experiments and took more photographs of the 6 YouTube Space Lab group activation pack experiments. And also today, Hoshide has been transferring CDs between the CD library and the H2 Transfer Vehicle 3 transfer case. He reconfigured a space station computer from the Japanese experiment module remote manipulator system from earlier this morning. He and Akaba also worked together this morning to connect cabin ducts to the environmental control life support system rack in the Japanese experiment module. He also performed in-flight maintenance to the portable emergency provisions and quick dawn mask assembly inspections. And at the end of the day, the crew members will have put in their daily 2 hours of exercise using the onboard gym equipment. They will also participate in a final daily planning conference with the ground controllers around the world before evening prep for a light-duty weekend. The crew is then scheduled to go to bed at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control Houston.
Für Romantiker und Himmelsgucker gibt es jetzt ganz besondere Nächte. Ein Meteoritenschwarm sorgt am Himmel über Deutschland für ungewohnt viele Sternschnuppen, nämlich mehr als 100 pro Stunde. Dazu Mick Locher.
So sehen die kleinen Wunderkerzen aus der Milchstraße aus. Rasend schnell tauchen sie in die Erdatmosphäre ein. Und weil die Teilchen aus Staub und Steinen so schnell sind, verglühen sie im Nu in der Reibungshitze. Wer sich für diesen Anblick die Nacht um die Ohren schlug, wollte nur eines:
Sternschnuppen. Jede Menge Sternschnuppen.
Wer gute Augen hatte und viel Geduld mitbrachte, wurde wie hier an der Sternwarte Bochum belohnt.
Ja, eine habe ich jetzt schon gesehen heute Abend. Eine ganz kurz, war zwar kurzes Vergnügen, aber...
Also ich habe schon Sternschnuppen gesehen und der Tradition entsprechend habe ich mir was gewünscht. Der Wunsch ist in Erfüllung gegangen.
Nach oben mit Blick Richtung Osten kann genügen, um die mit 200.000 Sachen eintauchenden Feuerkugeln gut zu sehen.
Das sind mit die schnellsten Sternschnuppen, die wir kennen. 60 Kilometer pro Sekunde legen sie etwa zurück. Und mit dieser Geschwindigkeit dringen sie auch in die Atmosphäre der Erde ein und rufen dort durch ihr Verglühen dieses Sternschnuppenleuchten hervor.
An diesem Wochenende soll die Sicht in ganz Deutschland gut sein. Wer dann zwischen 2 und 5 Uhr früh den Himmel beobachtet, könnte mit bis zu 120 Meteoren pro Stunde belohnt werden.
Massenweise waren sie zu sehen gestern Abend in Deutschland. Der Volksmund sagt ja, dass man sich etwas wünschen kann, wenn man eine solche Sternschnuppe sieht. Und in diesen klaren Nächten, es geht offenbar auch weiter damit, könnten die Wunschlisten sehr lang werden.
Sie leuchten nur für winzige Augenblicke, doch lang genug, um ihre glühenden Spuren über den Sommernachtshimmel zu ziehen und um angeblich stille Wünsche zu erfüllen. Bis zu 60 Sternschnuppen pro Stunde waren über Deutschland zu sehen und, fast ein Wunder, dank wolkenloser Nacht im ganzen Land war das faszinierende Spektakel überall zu sehen. Mit 30 Kilometern pro Sekunde rasen die Trümmerstücke aus dem Schweif eines Kometen auf die Erde zu und verglühen beim Eintritt in die Erdatmosphäre mit bis zu 4000 Grad. Jedes Jahr im August kreuzen sich die Wege der Erde und der Perseiden im Weltall. Und wer jetzt immer noch Wünsche offen hat, auch in den kommenden Tagen lohnt sich der Blick in den Sternenhimmel noch.
Einen schönen guten Abend. Es ist die Zeit der Perseiden. Da regnen besonders viele Sternschnuppen auf die Erde. Gestern Nacht war der Höhepunkt. Und das wollten wir einmal hier am Alpenrand und auch im Erzgebirge für Sie einfangen. Nach Sonnenuntergang ging es los. Und ich sage jetzt einfach mal nichts mehr. Und Sie wünschen sich was. Dann graute der Morgen, das war aber wirklich ein fantastisches Grauen. Auch die nächsten Tage fallen noch viele Sternschnuppen vom Himmel.
Perseiden oder auch Laurentius-Tränen genannt, ein Sternschnuppenschauer, immer im Sommer um diese Zeit. Guten Abend zur Aktuellen Stunde am Sonntag. Kleiner Tipp, auch in der kommenden Nacht, da sind die Schnuppen wieder in Scharen unterwegs, so wie hier in der Eifel.
Ja, die Abschlussfeier heute Abend noch, dann sind die 30. Olympischen Sommerspiele Geschichte. Nach einer Forsa-Umfrage im Auftrag von RTL finden fast 70% der Bundesbürger, dass die Spiele in London insgesamt gut organisiert waren. Doch für London selbst waren die Spiele keine reine Erfolgsgeschichte. Birte Berg erklärt Ihnen, warum.
So sieht es aus, wenn die Briten eine der letzten Chancen zum Feiern nutzen. Marathonlauf der Männer am Sonntagnachmittag. Nach 19 Tagen kollektiven Fahneschwenken, Anfeuern und Feiern endet die Union Jack Party heute Abend. Es ist schade, dass alles vorbei ist. Es waren fantastische 2 Wochen. Eine große Party, wir sind wirklich traurig. Die goldenen Spiele der Briten sind auch für die Veranstalter und den Bürgermeister ein voller Erfolg. Wir haben einen super Job gemacht. Die Olympischen Spiele 2012 waren perfekt und ich bin traurig, dass sie jetzt zu Ende gehen. Aber weinen werde ich nicht. Grund zur Freude, das ausgebliebene Chaos. Die Olympic Lane hat problemlos funktioniert. In der U-Bahn waren sogar in der Rush-Hour noch Sitzplätze frei. Und auch die anfänglichen Sicherheitsprobleme haben die Briten schnell in den Griff bekommen. Doch diese Organisation hat seinen Preis. Die Gesamtinvestitionen belaufen sich auf umgerechnet 11,7 Milliarden Euro. Davon hat allein der Bau der Sportstätten umgerechnet 8 Milliarden Euro verschlungen. Doch ausgezahlt haben sich die hohen Investitionen nicht für alle. Die Londoner Einzelhändler verzeichnen einen Umsatzrückgang von sage und schreibe 90% während der Olympischen Spiele. Zum einen kamen nicht so viele Olympiatouristen wie erwartet und zum anderen haben die Londoner die Stadt verlassen. Grund dafür sind laut Experten die Politiker. Vor 3, 4 oder 5 Jahren haben uns die Politiker versprochen, dass Millionen Touristen in die Stadt kommen. Aber jetzt ist London leer. Wir haben einen Einbruch erlitten, aber auf lange Sicht hoffen wir, von den Spielen zu profitieren. Die Londoner schauen also nach vorne. Und in 2 Wochen geht die Party dann auch schon weiter. Bei den Paralympics heißt es dann wieder höher, schneller, weiter.
Und zu den Olympiagewinnern von heute wollen wir Ihnen jetzt noch einige Sportler zeigen, die uns in den vergangenen Tagen Respekt eingeflößt haben. Sportler, die in London nach dem reinen olympischen Motto angetreten sind. Dabei sein ist alles. Carsten Mahlstedt über Athleten mit wenig Chancen und viel Herz.
Oft sind es sympathische Missgeschicke, die die Herzen der Fans höher schlagen lassen. Der Angolaner Fortunato Pacavira fand mit seinem Boot zunächst nicht in den Startschuh. Die Konkurrenz musste erst eine halbe Minute auf ihn warten, dann fuhr sie ihm auf und davon.
Es war schon sehr lustig, aber für ihn war es bestimmt ein großer Traum, der dort sich erfüllt hat.
In London haben die Verlierer die Herzen der Zuschauer im Sturm erobert. Ahmed Attari aus Katar kam über 400 Meter Lagen eine Bahn hinter allen anderen an und bekam den meisten Applaus.
Olympia lebt von seiner Globalität und dass tatsächlich Athleten ihre ureigenste Form und Auffassung von Sport dann auch überbringen.
Der Antibold, Christ Beke-Walasi, kugelrunder Sprinter vom Pazifikinselstaat Salomonen, hatte im 100 Meter Vorlauf natürlich keine Chance. Ebenso wenig wie Mazempe Teko auf 50 Meter Freistil. Die 25-Jährige aus Lesotho schied in der Vorrunde aus. Einer der ungewöhnlichsten Olympiastarter, der reitende Mönch Kenki Sato aus Japan, der in Deutschland trainiert.
Er wird wohl wieder zurückgehen in sein Kloster und lässt aber ein Pferd in Deutschland und möchte dann in Japan und in Deutschland ein bisschen weiterreiten.
Dabei sein ist manchmal eben doch alles. Für Afghanistans einzige Athletin Tahmina Kohistani war allein schon der Start in der Vorrunde ein kleiner Sieg. Ebenso für Sarah Attar aus Saudi-Arabien. Wenn schon keine Medaillen, den Respekt der Fans in aller Welt haben die Gewinner der Herzen sich redlich verdient.
Ja, das haben sie. Und jetzt kommen wir zu den Gewinnern, zu den
sportlichen Helden. Unsere Hockeyjungs holten nämlich das 11. Gold für Deutschland bei diesen Olympischen Spielen und feierten damit bereits ihren insgesamt 4. Olympiasieg. Nach dem 2:1-Triumph gegen die Niederlande kannte der Jubel keine Grenzen und es folgte eine rauschende Partynacht. Über die Goldfeier und die letzten sportlichen Olympia-Highlights berichten Marc Betz und Reinhard Brinks.
Gegen Mitternacht gab Kapitän Max Müller im Deutschen Haus per Sektdusche das Startsignal zur großen Hockeysause. Bis zum frühen Morgengrauen genossen die frisch gebackenen Olympiasieger ihren Triumph, so wie man es von Feierkönigen gewohnt ist.
Es war der Kindheitstraum, mal Gold zu holen und das haben wir es als Team geschafft in dieser Mannschaft. Das ist einfach nur geil, wenn man jetzt sieht, was hier los ist.
Vor der feuchtfröhlichen Fete, die später auf der MS Deutschland ihre wilde Fortsetzung fand, hatten die Goldjungs schon gegen die Niederländer alles gegeben. Neben dem Einsatz der gesamten Mannschaft überragte dabei vor allem Torhüter Max Weinhold, der die Gegner verzweifeln ließ, wie einst Fußballkollege Oliver Kahn.
Wenn ich Sie als Titan des deutschen Hockeys bezeichnen würde, würden Sie zustimmen?
Ja, können Sie gerne machen.
Matchwinner auf dem Feld war der zweifache Torschütze Jan-Philipp Rabente. Erst erzielte der 22-Jährige mit einer sehenswerten Einzelaktion das 1:0. 5 Minuten vor Schluss gelang ihm dann auch noch der 2:1 Siegtreffer. Was für ein Tag für den Olympianeuling.
Das ist ein absoluter Traum, ich kann es auch gar nicht glauben. Ich muss die Goldmedaille ganz fest in der Hand halten, dass ich es wirklich glauben kann und ja, Erfüllung meiner kühnsten Träume.
Ganz oben angekommen sind auch die Sprinter Jamaikas. Mit Schlussläufer Usain Bolt lief das Quartett der 4x100-Meter-Staffel in 36,85 Sekunden neuen Weltrekord und Bolt zu seinem 3. Gold von London. Ihren 14. Olympiasieg der Geschichte bejubelten dagegen die US-Basketballer. Im Finale gegen Spanien setzten sich die NBA-Superstars mit LeBron James mit 107:100 durch und holten wie erwartet Gold. Besonders schmerzhaft endete Olympia dagegen für den deutschen Wasserspringer Martin Wolfram. Er hatte sich am Abend im Finale vom 10-Meter-Turm die Schulter ausgekugelt, machte aber trotzdem weiter. Für Platz 8 am Ende gab es zwar kein Edelmetall, eine Tapferkeitsmedaille hat Wolfram aber ganz sicher verdient.
Heute werden die letzten olympischen Medaillen vergeben. Sven, da waren noch mal spannende Entscheidungen dabei, oder?
Ja, absolut. Frankreich ist nach 2008 wieder Olympiasieger im Handball. Russland gewinnt überraschend im Volleyball. Beim Basketball war das Gold eigentlich schon an das US Dream Team vergeben. Das Finale heute gegen Spanien war aber alles andere als eindeutig.
Die Spanier in den roten Trikots, das erste Team in diesem Turnier, das die USA ein bisschen ärgert. Rodriguez mit der Führung für den Europameister Mitte des 2. Viertels. Unter den Augen des spanischen Königshauses ist auch das 3. Viertel ausgeglichen. Erst im Schlussabschnitt setzt sich der große Favorit durch. Kevin Durant mit einem 3-Punkte-Wurf. Am Ende hört es sich deutlich an, 107:100. Die 14. olympische Goldmedaille für die amerikanischen Basketballer.
44 Medaillen für Deutschland, 3 mehr als in Peking, Platz 6 im Medaillenspiegel. Und das 11. Gold durch die deutschen Hockeyherren war ein ganz besonderer Schlusspunkt.
Weit nach Mitternacht begann für die Hockeyherren die 3. Halbzeit. Denn es galt, den Olympiasieg zu feiern, ohne Rücksicht auf Maskottchen. Noch Stunden zuvor hatte sich das Team von Bundestrainer Weise in einem hochspannenden Finale mit 2:1 gegen die Niederlande durchgesetzt. Mit etwas Glück, denn kurz vorm 2. Treffer verließ Torschütze Philipp Rabente absichtlich das Spielfeld, lief ums gegnerische Tor und tauchte rechtzeitig wieder auf, um den Sieg perfekt zu machen. Eigentlich irregulär, eigentlich, denn keiner hat's gemerkt, keiner hat's moniert und so holte Deutschland wie schon 2008 den Titel im Olympischen Hockeyturnier.
Amanda Davis looks back at 2 glorious weeks.
London 2012, 7 years of planning, 17 days of great stories, success and celebration.
It all started with Daniel Craig, the Corgis, and of course, the Queen. And finally, we got the answer to a long-running mystery.
It then created history.
We've said hello to a new generation.
But not all were welcomed with open arms.
We've bid farewell to some true greats. Many were stronger than ever. There were those who were older than ever. But others saw their bodies let them down.
We've had our fair share of scandal with seating,
with security,
and even social media.
Sadly, there's been the drugs as well. While some bent their bodies, others chose to bend the rules. There's been royals and runaways and rain, quite a lot of it. Then lightning struck once, twice, 3 times.
There's been talk of a new world order.
Not all of it deliberate.
But as far as the hosts are concerned, Britannia still rules the waves.
Some flew. Some fell. Others were just left hanging.
Give me a ladder.
It's been long. There's been tears. But we've had a whole lot of laughs along the way.
So as we're left looking at the legacy of London 2012, Rio, it's over to you. Amanda Davis, CNN.
Amanda, the London Games have been called a glorious success, but give us your honest take. How did the games go?
Hi, Christy. Well, this is the first games that I have covered, but from my point of view, it seems to have gone incredibly well. From the athletes' point of view, they seem to have loved it, even the ones who didn't necessarily do so well in their events. The fans certainly seem to have enjoyed it. Lots of people walking around with big smiles on their faces. They've really got in on the action, and the media as a whole seem to have enjoyed it as well. The IOC president, most importantly, probably, Jacques Rogge, he's been to a lot of Olympic Games, and he's called it absolutely fantastic, a Games that has refreshed the Olympic movement. There were, as you said, concerns about transport, about security, about ticketing in the run-up. In terms of the transport and security, they seem to have gone very, very well on the whole. There were the issues about the empty seats in the first week at the events, particularly at things like the basketball and the swimming, but they seemed to be sorted out as well. And in terms of the actual sporting feats and the achievements, the contests, there were some fantastic battles in the pool, weren't there? There was the great rivalry between the USA and Jamaica on the track as well. And the home team, Team GB, did fantastically well as well. They put in their best performance in over 100 years. And so on the whole, everybody seems to think it's gone pretty well, and I'm certainly trying to cling on to every last second of it.
We got to talk about the closing ceremony, the fireworks, the rock music, the Spice Girls. Amanda, can you walk us through the highlights?
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. It started with a newspaper-covered scene from London, the London Eye, Big Ben, Tower Bridge, and then it was a celebration of 50 years of British music. They called it a mashed-up symphony of British music. The most recent act, well, the youngest act, I suppose, was One Direction, and then you also had George Michael. You had the re-emergence of the Spice Girls on glittery black taxis, and all the athletes who'd competed were all in the middle of a Union Jack, a spectacular Union Jack floor to the stadium. If anybody had any doubts as to the colours of the Union flag ahead of this Games, they're certainly in no doubt now. There was a sensational lighting display with each seat had behind it this really clever lighting box, and the lighting in the stadium was absolutely spectacular. And then, of course, we had the official handover to Rio, so it's all over to Rio for 4 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, music-wise, it was sort of a comeback to a lot of familiar names, but it rocked. Let's talk more about where you are geographically, the Olympic venue, the Olympic stadium, and also the fate of where you are, the fate of East London. I mean, it was the place to be during the Games these last 2 weeks, but what will happen to the area in the years ahead?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about these games, about the legacy of the games. And we've, of course, got the Paralympics to come in just 16 days' time, and they will take place in this park as well. But then there will be a significant period of change in the park. The main stadium, the Olympic Stadium, is going to lose about 55,000 seats. We expect there will be a football team that will occupy that, but that's not sorted yet. The Aquatics Centre, that's going to be losing its seating, because this is being heralded as the perfect model for a sustainable Olympic Games, suggesting that other venues and other host cities should use it in the past to put in low-cost temporary stadiums that will then be taken down or altered to keep the sustainability and avoid the white elephant situation. It's going to be renamed the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in 2013, and it's going to be used as a venue for visitors to come and get involved in sport, and there's going to be a community here, people living here, and the sporting legacy will very much carry on.
A sustainable games, a glorious games. Matt Davis, thank you.
In Feier sind vergangene Nacht die 30. Olympischen Sommerspiele in London zu Ende gegangen. Zum Abschluss des größten Sportfests der Welt begeisterten die Briten noch einmal vor allem mit Stars aus der Rock- und Popszene. Rund um den Globus saßen mehr als 1 Milliarde Menschen am Fernseher, als die olympische Flamme in London erlosch. Unser Korrespondent Ulrich Klose war dabei.
Das war groß, das war ganz Großbritannien. Zum Abschluss der Spiele wurde London für eine Nacht zum Party-Olymp. George Michael gab sein Comeback nach seiner lebensgefährlichen Lungenentzündung. Der grauhaarige Queen-Gitarrist Brian May intonierte den Stadionkracher. Und als man dachte, jetzt kann nicht mehr viel kommen, fuhren die Spice Girls auf Londoner Taxis ein. Eine letzte Reunion für Olympia. Und natürlich trugen die Girls der Ringe messerscharfe Minis. Auf der Tribüne hatten Prince Harry und Kate Middleton zusammen mit 80.000 Zuschauern königlichen Spaß, auch ohne die Queen, die im Urlaub ist.
Fantastisch, absolut fantastisch.
Das Beste, was ich in meinem Leben bisher gesehen habe. Wie alt bist du denn? 10. Wir Briten haben einen tollen Job gemacht. Das Stadion war in ein Mini-London verwandelt worden, mit vielen Sehenswürdigkeiten und mit der Rush-Hour in der wuseligen Weltstadt. Die Athleten bekamen ihre eigene Feierzone. Gewichtheber Matthias Steiner kam nach seinem Wettkampfunfall mit Schal, Fabian Hambüchen turnte mit Kamera herum und Christoph Wilke, der Schlagmann unseres Goldachters, trug die deutsche Fahne. Seine Olympiaflagge wurde Londons Bürgermeister los an den Amtskollegen von Rio, Ausrichter von Olympia 2016. Kurz nach Mitternacht erklärte IOC-Präsident Rogge die Spiele von London für beendet und Mr. Bürgermeister machte sich auf den Heimweg. Peking hatte die Erwartungen an uns hochgesetzt, aber ich denke, London hat das sogar übertroffen. Das Löschen der olympischen Flamme in dem Blütenkelch bildete den bewegenden Schlusspunkt, bevor es die Altrocker von The Who noch mal richtig krachen ließen. Goodbye London, thank you für goldene Spiele. Olympia in London, das waren 16 Tage Feuerwerk voller sportlicher Höhepunkte und guter Laune. Zu guter Letzt haben die Briten das gemacht, was sie am besten können. Sie haben sich selbst gefeiert und die Welt mit ihrer Musik begeistert. Nun kehrt der Blues ein. Wir werden die Olympischen Spiele zunächst vermissen.
Rover Curiosity is getting what NASA calls a brain transplant. No small feat considering the remote upgrades happening from 350 million miles away. And if anything goes wrong, it could be the last time NASA has contact with it. The upgrade should be wrapped up a little later today. Curiosity's been sending back pictures of a Death Valley-like environment around its landing site on Mars.
A brain transplant. It's no small feat, considering the remote upgrade is happening some 560 million kilometers away. And if anything goes wrong, it could be the last time NASA has contact with it. Now, the upgrade, it should be wrapped up later today. As John Zarella tells us, Curiosity's mission is already considered a success.
Here's an example of just how successful this mission is going. Imagine they traveled 350 million miles, almost halfway around the sun to catch up with Mars, and they hit within 1 mile of the entry point. That's just one of the many successes they've had so far.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
So much for 7 minutes of terror. The engineers and scientists had pulled it off. A series of never-before-attempted Martian atmospheric acrobatics ended with the rover Curiosity safely and all in one piece on the surface. Almost immediately, the rover phoned home, sending back images. Look, I'm here. First, one of its wheels, then Mount Sharp in the distance. One camera captured incredible pictures of the descent, and each day, new images better than the last. It will be a couple weeks before all the rover's systems are checked out and it starts roaming the Martian countryside. Its first target of interest may not be far off, a spot where the top layer of sand was blown off by the descent engines.
They send down a jet of turbulence, and because Mars has a less dense atmosphere, it doesn't mix the way it would on Earth, and it's just a shot coming straight down, and it blows all the soil away, and it drilled a hole all the way down to the bedrock.
For the mission team, this site, the Gale Crater, is expected to produce a motherlode of science. Inside the crater, Mount Sharp's layers of rock date back to when the planet was wetter, more Earth-like. There may be clues to whether life could ever have existed here, and it's believed water might once have flowed on the crater floor.
These rocks are layered clay, carbonate, and sulfate. So this is what you'd get in a quiet sort of lake environment.
Bethany Ellman's job is to help decide which are, let's say, rocks of interest. Then, using a laser, she'll vaporize a tiny, really tiny spot on the rock. The plasma emitted is then analyzed for minerals.
And this is the type of rock that would be deposited in a kind of quiet, standing body of water. So we will be looking for clues like this.
The mission team says Curiosity has performed flawlessly, beyond their wildest expectations. So while it's only been on the surface of Mars less than a week, the bar for the rest of the mission has already been set pretty high.
Islands dealing with some tremendous fires over this region. We have two areas, La Gomera right here. This national park right here is the one that has been in flames for days already. Nearby towns like Vallehermoso had to be evacuated overnight. Just a tragic situation. Look at the pictures, Christy, over this region. They need rain. The temperatures have been into the lower 40s for weeks on end, and they haven't had enough rainfall. The area that is being threatened is a national park that is famous for its laurel trees that are endemic to this area. You really can't find them anywhere else in the world, and you can see them, and they're very concerned, of course, about the ecological problems that could happen in this protected area, but of course, for the lives and livelihood of the people who live there. No rain in sight, and they keep fighting those flames. Back to you.
Oh, dear. Good luck to them, and here's hoping they can contain those blazes soon. Maya Ramos there. Thank you.
Im Vatikan gibt es neben Ex-Kammerdiener Paolo Gabriele offenbar einen zweiten Mann. Heute wird der auf einer Pressekonferenz benannt, Claudio Sciarpelletti, ein bisher unbekannter Computertechniker im Staatssekretariat.
Bei der Durchsuchung seines Büros wurden einige Dokumente gefunden, die im Zusammenhang mit Paolo Gabriele stehen.
Paolo Gabriele, hier Bilder, die ihn beim Servieren zeigen, soll bislang der Haupttäter sein. Er wird wegen schweren Diebstahls angeklagt. Er soll brisante Papiere aus dem Vatikan gebracht haben, Papiere, in denen es um Korruption und Misswirtschaft geht. Zusätzlich soll er Gegenstände und einen auf den Papst ausgestellten Scheck über 100.000 € gestohlen haben.
Der Vatikan hat klargemacht, dass die Untersuchungen nicht abgeschlossen sind. Sie sind jetzt so weit, dass man zu einem Prozess kommen kann, aber das heißt nicht, dass es nicht noch andere Dinge geben wird, andere Personen geben wird, gegen die vorgegangen wird.
Ludwig Ringeifel von der katholischen Nachrichtenagentur hat die Untersuchungsakten der Ermittler heute genau studiert. Der Prozess wird im Vatikan geführt werden, mit allem, was dazugehört.
Dort arbeiten Juristen, teils weltliche, teils kirchliche, also ausgebildete Juristen. Und die Verfahren sind auch öffentlich. Es gilt im Vatikan das Strafrecht, das in Italien im Jahr 1929 galt.
Doch warum hat Paolo Gabriele so gehandelt? Bei den Untersuchungen wurden auch Psychologen zu Rat gezogen.
Die beiden psychiatrischen Gutachten, die jetzt da auszugsweise veröffentlicht sind, geben ein ziemlich erschreckendes Bild über den Mann. Also der war doch sehr einfach gestrickt und war seiner Aufgabe eigentlich nicht wirklich gewachsen. Also der Aufgabe, da in unmittelbarer Nähe zum Papst zu arbeiten und auch vertrauliche Dokumente in die Finger zu bekommen. Er wurde auch hin und wieder mit kleinen Sekretariatsaufgaben betraut und es geht klar aus den Gutachten hervor, er war wirklich überfordert damit.
Der Prozess im Vatikan wird voraussichtlich im Oktober beginnen. Der Papst kann Paolo Gabriele begnadigen, wenn dann aber erst nach dem Prozess.
This is Mission Control, Houston. A lot of science work on board the International Space Station on the agenda to start this new week, but also a lot of work being done for preparation for a big activity that's coming up next week. Commander Gennady Podolka and flight engineer Yuri Malenchenko spent Monday outfitting the Orlan spacesuits that they'll wear for a spacewalk next Monday, August the 20th. They'll be going outside to relocate a cargo crane from the Pirs docking compartment to the Zarya module, as well as to install some new debris shielding on the Zvezda module, deploy a small satellite, and retrieve some exposure experiments. Flight engineer Sergei Revin spent much of his day working with the Russian laptop computer software updates as well as virus protection operations, and then the afternoon on a Russian experiment that is called BAR. In that experiment, the investigators are testing out principles and methods for space station leak control. Flight engineer Aki Hoshide started out the day setting up the ultrasound hardware for the Sprint experiment, and then got some help from flight engineer Joe Akaba to don some of that hardware. Then, with ground help, Hoshide did self-scans of his leg during exercise. The Sprint experiment is evaluating how well high-intensity and low-volume exercise sessions help maintain a crew member's physical fitness as compared to a low-intensity exercise that is conducted over a longer period of time. Joe Akaba also had time on his schedule on Monday for maintenance on the Total Organics Carbon Analyzer, as well as maintenance with the YouTube Space Lab experiment Spider enclosure. For flight engineer Sunny Williams, she spent a good portion of the early part of her day taking some samples for ongoing biological investigations of station crew members. She also conducted maintenance on hardware inside the Columbus Laboratory module, and late in the day did ultrasound self-scans as part of the Sprint experiment, too. Tuesday will see the Russian crew members focusing on spacewalk preparation. The U.S. Operating System crew members will be involved as well. Spacewalk prep is going on not only for the Russian spacewalk to be conducted next week, but the start of maintenance on the U.S. spacesuits for the late August spacewalk that will be conducted out of the Quest airlock. Crew members also have a lot of science operations, with the Hoshide starting the reconfiguration of a new aquatic habitat, plus ultrasound examination of crew members' eyes as part of the continuing investigation into the way microgravity affects the human body.
Good morning and welcome to Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station update. We're here with the International Space Station Flight Control Room with the Space Station Flight Control team at the Mission Control Center in Houston. And leading the team today is Flight Director Tomas Gonzalez Torres. Sitting next to him in the Capcom seat, astronaut Sandy Magnus. On board the International Space Station are the 6 astronauts that make up the Expedition 32 crew. They're Commander Gennady Podolka and U.S. flight engineers Joe Akaba and Sunny Williams, Japanese flight engineer Aki Hoshide, and Russian flight engineers Yuri Malenchenko and Sergei Revin. This crew has been together for almost a full month now, since Williams, Hoshide, and Malenchenko arrived aboard their Soyuz 31S on July 16th. They've been in space for 31 days and at the space station for 29. They're planning to stay until November. Akaba, Podolka, and Revin, on the other hand, launched on May 14th and have been in space for 92 days, at the space station for 90. They'll be heading back to Earth on their own Soyuz vehicle next month. Crew's now more than halfway through their day, which started at 1 a.m. Central Time. They're currently flying 250 miles above the Pacific Ocean on a course that's going to take them over only the very southernmost tip of South America. Activity in both the Russian and U.S. sides of the space station today are focused on spacewalk preparations, as 2 spacewalks are scheduled to take place before the end of the month. The first is a Russian spacewalk planned for Monday, Commander Gennady Padalka and Flight Engineer Yuri Malenchenko will be going out in part to get the station ready for the arrival of the Russian Multi-Purpose Laboratory in 2013. Today they're preparing their spacesuits for that venture. And in the Quest airlock on the U.S. side of the space station, Flight Engineers Sonny Williams and Joe Acaba have been getting their own extravehicular mobility unit spacesuits ready for their spacewalk on August 30th. They'll be replacing a main bus switching unit on the 30th, and today they're getting ready for that work by recharging the spacesuit's batteries and refilling their water tanks. Inside the Japanese Kibo laboratory, Flight Engineer Aki Hoshide has been putting together one of the deliveries made by the visiting H-2 transfer vehicle, which launched from Japan on July 27th. It's called the Aquatic Habitat, and as the name implies, will eventually provide a home for freshwater fish on the space station. And of course, no day in space would be complete without a few science experiments. On the Russian side of the space station, Flight Engineer Sergei Revin is studying the process of full-phase separation of the gas-liquid fine dispersion system in microgravity, as well as the dynamics of crew member interactions. Hoshide, Williams, and Acaba, meanwhile, are performing ultrasound examinations of their eyes as part of the continuing study of how life in space affects astronauts' vision. That's what's been going on in space today, and this is Mission Control Houston.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. We're going to be giving you a look today at two spacewalks that are coming up for the crew of Expedition 32. The first one's going to be on August the 20th. The second one is going to be on August the 30th. Here to give us more details about all of that is the lead flight director for Expedition 32, Dina Cantella, as well as the spacewalk officer, Keith Johnson. We'll start off with Dina.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Things are going extremely well on Space Station, and our crew is in great spirits and looking forward to our pair of spacewalks coming up. The increment's about halfway over, and the first part of the increment was crammed full of visiting vehicles. Following the Soyuz arrival, we had the 47 Progress that undocked, and we were performing a Coors navigational system redock test. And for that redock test, the first attempt was aborted, and I'm sure you've heard that. The Coors system did not activate properly. And so while our Russian colleagues worked on what we were going to do for a redock attempt, we did go ahead and rendezvous and capture HTV, our Japanese cargo vehicle, and the ground and the crew did an excellent job with that. And then they berthed it on the same day. And the following day, 47 Progress did come in with a successful docking. The Coors NA, that new system, was warmed up inside the Progress just a few degrees, but enough to allow its activation. And so that's how we were able to successfully dock 47 Progress. 47 Progress undock went extremely well, and 48 Progress launch and docking occurred on the same day, which was a new test of a 4-orbit rendezvous capability, and that went exactly as according to plan. Since then, we've been doing a lot of research and also a lot of robotic operations associated with the exposed pallet to move some research that was externally brought up in HTV over to the space station, over to the Japanese module exposed facility, and also to out on the truss. And so those operations went very smoothly, and we really only had a couple of hiccups. The only hiccup that has affected our operations has been a camera that failed on the SSRMS Canada Arm 2. It's a boom camera, and after some discussions, we decided that we're going to change that out on this upcoming US EVA, and Keith Johnson will talk about all those details coming up. But then to talk a little bit about our crew and the operations, I wanted to point out that we are, despite all the visiting vehicles, at this point anticipating that we're going to meet our research objectives for this part of the year. And that's an incredibly big step, because we have had a lot of systems type of work that we've had to do associated with the vehicles, but we're very proud that we've enabled the crew with a lot of opportunity to get ahead. The crew's been doing a great job, and I think as an example, we had a lot of ground control that was associated with the robotic ops, and this enabled the crew to focus on research and that sort of thing on board, while the ground did a lot of the robotic operations. So congratulations to our Japanese, Canadian, and Houston robotics folks for helping us with that. And so first I'm going to talk about the crew a little bit, and then I'm going to go into the Russian segment EVA. So if I could have the first graphic. All right, so on the left is Akihiko Hoshide, and we call him Aki. And to his right is Yuri Malinchiko, and next to him is Sunita Williams, and we call her Sunny. Those three arrived in mid-July. And next to Sunny, you see Joe Akaba, who's currently leading the U.S. portion of station, followed by the ISS commander Gennady Padalka, and then Sergei Revin. And 4 of those 6 are going to be performing spacewalks in the next couple of weeks. Gennady and Yuri will perform the Russian spacewalk on August 20th, and Sunny and Aki will perform the U.S. spacewalk on August 30th. So the next graphic, please. The Russian segment EVA will be in Orlan spacesuits out of the Pirs module, with egress happening Monday at 9:40 a.m. Houston local time. Gennady will be EV1 with a red stripe, and he'll have the helmet camera on. He's previously conducted 8 spacewalks, 6 on ISS and 2 on the Mir space station. Yuri will be EV2 with a blue stripe on his suit, and he's performed 4 EVAs in the past, 1 on STS-106 as well as another ISS EVA, and 2 on the Mir space station. So in terms of their tasks for the EVA, there's 3 main tasks and 3 get-ahead tasks. The crew will relocate a Strela crane to move it off the docking compartment piers and over to the forward end of the Zarya module. And the Pirs module will be replaced with the Russian multipurpose logistics module Nuaka when it comes up in 2013, so that crane needs to move. They'll also release a passive spherical satellite pronounced Sphera, or also called T-Vector, that will allow our Russian colleagues to evaluate ground station tracking and modeling for orbital debris. The crew will install 5 micrometeoroid orbital debris shields on the small diameter of the Zvezda module. And then as get-aheads, we've got 3 of those, time permitting. There's 2 external experiments, and also there's an installation of some support struts for the EVA ladder to make it more stable. The expected EVA duration is 6 hours and 25 minutes. And Joe and Sergei will be in the Poisk module near their Soyuz for the EVA, while Sunny and Aki will have access to the US segment and their Soyuz. Next you'll see a video of the Russian segment EVA. This is the aft end of station with the Russian modules surrounding the Pirs airlock. The hatch opens and you'll see Yuri and then Gennady egressing onto the EVA ladder. Now looking from above, you'll see Gennady adjusting the Strela 2 foot restraint and Yuri on the tip of the Strela boom, riding it up to the other Strela on the zenith part of ISS on Poisk. The Strela that's in motion is the one that will move over to Zarya, so Gennady then retracts it, as you see here, and he positions it for the big move. Zooming in on Gennady, you can see him here. He's positioning an attached foot restraint for the relocation and stowage. At the top of the screen, you'll see Yuri adjusting his foot restraint so he can position the Strela on Poisk for its extension down to Gennady. So here's the positioning. And now he's extending that upper Strela down to Gennady's worksite for the Strela 2 attachment. The flashing area points out where the 2 Strelas attach. And next you'll see Yuri making his way down the upper Strela boom to assist Gennady in releasing Strela 2 from its mounting location on Pirs. And they work together to get it into a good position for the relocation. Here they're rotating Strela 2 so that it's in line with Strela 1, and that'll make it a more compact package on the end of the boom for the maneuver. So after everything's squared away, Yuri translates up to the base of the upper Strela so that he can manipulate the Strela mechanisms and begin the big relocation. So Gennady gets a really fantastic view as Yuri pitches Strela up. And he also positions Strela 2 by spinning it around. And then he turns the entire Strela to face Zarya. And now you can see the move over to the forward end of Zarya, followed by an extension of the boom. Yuri's just using hand cranks to operate the Strela. So Yuri then translates forward on ISS down the Strela to meet up with Gennady and help with the removal of Strela 2 and its installation. And so after some manipulation, they worked together to install it onto an adapter on Zarya. Yuri gets a short ride for the pitch down to stow Strela out of the way. And here you see him making his way aft on ISS, translating on Strela, and back to Poisk so he can drive Strela again. Now that the work is done on Zarya, Gennady hops on the end for his ride back. And once again, he'll get an amazing view. Strela is going to maneuver him back down to Piers, and this Strela will remain extended between Poisk and Piers at the end of the EVA. So here's the attachment area. And at this point, Gennady also has the opportunity to grab the first external experiment, SKK. You see it flashing. SKK is a materials experiment that allows for exposing multiple materials to space, and it closes up like a small briefcase, and it's brought inside. So here you see it flashing and folding up. So Gennady and Yuri are going to make their way back to the EVA ladder on Piers to deploy the spherical satellite, and here you see it flashing. The satellite's about 21 inches in diameter and it has a mass of about 20 pounds. It's completely passive. In the right-hand photo, you see two items. There's a mock-up of the sphere and also a tool to the right that holds the sphere while the crew egresses the airlock and gets into position. Before deploy, the crew releases a strap on the tool so that just the fingers are gripping it, and then they give the tool a push to launch it. It's deployed in the aft nadir direction, and it's expected to stay on orbit for about 3 months before re-entry. Next, you see Gennady and Yuri retrieving the debris shields from the airlock in 2 bundles. Here you can see the installation sites on this graphic. And there's a total of 5 shields. They're bundled in a package of 3 and a package of 2. The bundles get separated, and the shields attached to the handrails on the small diameter compartment of Zvezda. So in this video, you can see the 3 portside shield installation sites. And these shields are similar in design as what we've previously installed on past EVAs. So next you can see the second external experiment that the crew may bring inside if they have time. This is called BioRisk, and it has experiments inside that have been exposed to space. This is a photo of the Piers module on the right with a close-up view showing the BioRisk containers. Here you see a get-ahead to install 2 struts on the EVA ladder, which should help for stability. And this equipment will later move to the new airlock on Nuaka. After that, Gennady and Yuri will ingress the Piers, and we'll call it an EVA. So the only thing I wanted to add here is that for the lead ISS flight director for the Russian segment EVA, that will be Jerry Jason, and for the US EVA, that will be Ed Van Cise. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Keith Johnson, who'll describe US EVA 18.
Thank you, Dina. Well, let's see, this is the first USA in over a year. The last EVA that was performed on space station by the US team was by Mike Fossum and Ron Guerin during the STS-135 mission back in July. Our first slide, we have pictures of our EV crew members. We've already mentioned that Sunny Williams is EV1 on this EVA. She'll have the red stripes on her suit. This will be her 5th EVA. She's done 4 so far during Expedition 14 and 15. Totaling about 29 hours and 17 minutes of spacewalk time, so she'll be adding to that. Our EV2 for the upcoming EVA is Aki Hoshida. We call him Aki, and this is his first spacewalk. He will be the 3rd Japanese astronaut to do a spacewalk following Takao Doi and Suichi Noguchi. So let's see. Joe Akaba is the arm operator for the EVA. Aki will be on the arm for the majority of the EVA. And then we have a ground-based IV crew member, which is Jack Fisher, and he's not done an EVA before, but he's helping out with the development of the EVA. I've got a slide that shows our list of tasks The first thing we're doing on the EVA, and the main reason for going EVA, is the main bus switching unit number 1, removal and replacement. This particular box has failed in such a way that it's passing power, but it can no longer be switched. And in order to do future operations, we need to take that box out and put one in that allows us to do that. Another task that we're doing on the EVA is cable routing 2 primary and redundant power cables to the Russian multipurpose laboratory module that Dina referred to. We started on the US segment and run it over to the interface between the Russian and US segment. And then the Russians will later on run their half of that cabling. Just recently, we had a failure of one of the cameras on the SSRMS, the Boom B camera. This morning, we had meetings with management, and we decided that this is the next highest priority. So that camera will be removed and replaced. As our get-aheads, and time permitting, the next task we have is a protective cover installation on the pressurized mating adapter 2, which is at the forward end of station, and we are covering it up so that we protect against micrometeoroid debris and keep it safe until we fly up a new docking system that's coming up, and then we'll take that cover off and install that in the future. We do have other camera problems that we're looking at. One of them is on the mobile base system, the mast camera, and in order to bring that home, we will be removing that camera, bringing it inside. Also, there is a camera problem on the Kibo exposed facility, and we will be, as a get-ahead, removing and replacing that if time permits. And finally, the Zarya Power Data Grapple fixture, the PDGF, has a potential for another wire that may cause problems, and we may send the crew over to pull that debris out. So I've got a graphic that shows some footage of the EVA as we have it going. So if you'll bring up the next. Okay, so the EVA depress starts at about 6:45 Central Time, and with the crew coming out the hatch at about 7:15 a.m. Sunny Williams is EV1. She'll be the first one out of the hatch, followed by Aki. Aki will be handing out bags and tools. Sunny's first task is to hook up what we call a fish stringer, which is a tether with many hooks on it, and she'll attach bags and tools to that in preparation for the EVA, kind of a staging ground. After she's done with that, she'll rotate around to face the external stowage platform, which is where we have the spare main bus switching unit. In preparation for stowing the failed unit, we install what's called a multi-use tether end effector ball stack multi-use end effector. It's kind of a grapple on one end, grapple on the other. I'll refer to that as the mutt ball stack from here on out. And you see that blinking right now. After she's done with that, she'll remove straps on multi-layer insulation that's protecting the main bus switching unit as it's attached to a flight releasable attachment mechanism. She undoes Velcro straps, peels that back, gets it out of the way to expose the main bus switching unit. She'll put a torque multiplier on the 2 bolts that hold us onto the fram. Once she breaks the torque on those, she'll install what we call a scoop, which is a handling aid that allows Aki to pull this out when he removes it later on in the EVA. Once that's done, Sunny will turn around. She'll grab a bundle of cable, which is the MLM power cable, and she'll translate up to the lab Node 1 interface and hook up one end of that cable to another cable and start routing that aft. And you can see that highlighted in the video. She'll temporarily stow it attached to one of the handrails in the lower left. And meanwhile, Aki will be doing a translation adaptation. He'll take a bag with tools in it. He'll translate up to the S0 truss, phase 2 of the S0 truss. You'll see a handrail flashing in the graphic. He'll attach his tools in the bag to that handrail. And then he'll go over and he'll break torque on the failed main bus switching unit that you see over there to the left. After those, the torque is broken on both of those, he'll install scoops, which will provide him with a handling aid to therefore install an articulating portable foot restraint on the arm. And then from there, he will ingress the arm, and we'll wait for commanding of that box. And we are going to do a power down up test on this box to see if it comes back to life, just to get kind of a science experiment on it. Once that's done, they'll power it down. He'll drive the bolts, and from there, he'll back away with the MBSU, and he'll start on what we call a joint automated or operator commanded automated sequence, or JOCAS, which is a pre-programmed arm translation to head him back down. In the meantime, Sonny is going to take the other cable and go towards the interface between the Russian and the US segment and attach the second cable for the MLM to a handrail. And from there, she starts unwinding it and making her way nadir on space station around the PMA. She'll feed it underneath, and then she has to go and move the US crane out of the way. It currently is in the way of her translation path, so she'll get up and she'll do some manual maneuvering to get that out of the way. Then she heads back around and continues routing along node 1 forward to the S0 truss, and you'll see that blink on the graphic here. She feeds it into the interior of the S0 truss. At that point, roughly, Aki will have made his way down to the external stowage platform 2. He'll take the failed MBSU that he just removed, and he'll temporarily stow it on the MUT end effector that I pointed out before. From there, he'll maneuver into the spare main bus switching unit. He'll drive the 2 bolts, lift it out. He'll ground call the arm back away from the structure, and then the arm will continue motion, and he'll start another JOCAS from this position back up for installation. Meanwhile, Sonny will be working on the S0 truss. And the next fun thing that she gets to do is pull back some MLI that's on phase 3 of S0. It opens up a location where she can climb inside the truss, and you can see the MLI peeled out of the way and the opening that she gets to go inside. Next, you see the graphic of her inside taking the cable bundle, routing along some interior handrails, and that comes over to a panel that's up inside. You'll see the connector flashing. She gets herself into position. This was launched with some strings holding the bales in place. You can see those 3 white strings. She will cut those with scissors, throw the bale in the center, take that cap off, and then connect the cable at that point. When she's done with that, she'll clean up the worksite, cover the MLI, and then she'll go over and provide a set of eyes for Aki installing the spare main bus switching unit onto the S0 truss. He puts that into position, and he drives the 2 bolts, and then Sonny gets to leave and go do other work while he cleans up the worksite. One of the get-aheads that we have for a task, if we're ahead, is the MBS mass camera. We'll have Aki fly up to that position. It's a single bolt to remove that camera. Based on our recent priority change, he'll just take that camera off and bring it back with him. He won't install another camera in place of that. Then the arm will maneuver him back to the MBSU that has the scoops on it, and he'll use that to egress the arm. You'll see that. Down to the lower left, you can see Sonny at the failed MBSU sitting on the MUT ball stack. She'll take that, and she'll swing it around and install it back on the FRAM. She'll drive the bolts, take the scoops off, clean up the MUT end effector, and then reinstall the multi-layer insulation, and that's ready to sit there until it finds another use. Meanwhile, Aki is removing the articulating portable foot restraint, and he'll reposition that into a worksite interface at this worksite. The arm will reposition and provide him with access to the boom camera you see highlighted here. He will remove this camera and replace it with a spare that we will have brought out with us at the start of the EVA. And then, as time permits, he and Sonny will translate out to the forward end of the space station and install the pressurized mating adapter to cover. And it's just a multi-layer insulation that has some Kevlar fiber in it that will protect those surfaces from micrometeoroid debris. And they'll strap that to handrails that you see highlighted in the graphic. When they're done with that, again, depending on time permitting, they may be able to head over to Kibo and the exposed facility. And the forward camera on there has no lights on it. And so as a get-ahead, they may be able to remove that camera and replace it with a spare. It's planned for a 6.5-hour EVA, so at this point, they'll clean up their work sites and head back to the airlock. And thus concludes what we hope is a successful EVA.
Okay, we'll take some questions now. First, here in Houston, then we'll go to the phone lines. Let's see, we'll start with Gina.
All right, for both of you, what do you view as the most challenging element on each spacewalk?
Well, I'll just say on the Russian spacewalk, probably the SMUV of the Strela. It's a pretty big apparatus, and it's on the end of an almost 50-foot boom, maneuvering that around. In the past, they've had some trouble where they ran long on this particular task before, or a similar task of moving a Strela. But it wasn't necessarily due to anything in particular, it just kind of ran long. So it could be a timing thing associated with the Strela that could cause, trip them up a little bit and cause the EVA to run long.
Well, I would say from the USA perspective, the crew has seen this in the water several times, so they've got good training. But what ends up happening is we change priorities and we change the tasks that they're being asked that they looked at in their training a while ago. But we think that by getting them the right information and getting them talking with them before the EVA, that we've minimized that particular aspect of the EVA. So our risks are similar in that we want to make sure that we don't let the crew run long on a task. We've timelined it so that we can stop at various points to get them inside. So we're comfortable with that.
In the past, I know there's been concern about gloves, and they've been doing periodic checks on gloves during spacewalks. Is that still an operating procedure?
Well, from the US EVA, yes. We timeline glove inspections throughout the EVA. We are concerned. We have enhanced the gloves and made them better to resist damage that we've seen in the past. But we still do periodic checks to make sure that whatever they've been handling along the way hasn't caused any damage to cause them to come inside. The other aspect of it, that station's been up there for a long time, so we have the crew watch where they're going and make sure that they don't do anything untoward on their gloves.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gina. Let's go to the phone lines and take some questions from there. I think that we had Denise Chow. I think that we lost one person, so let's see who's there.
Hi, this is Denise.
Go ahead, Denise.
Just a couple quick questions for the US EVA. Will the astronauts be doing the in-suit light exercise prior to going out?
Well, that's a good question, and thank you for asking. I did have that in my notes, and I did mean to bring that up. Yes, that is correct. We will be doing the in-suit light exercise pre-breathe protocol, and that is currently, with the ways and trades, the best method for prolonged oxygen, and it minimizes the crew activity, and they don't have to sleep out in the airlock. So we find that it is the best protocol, and that's what we will be utilizing.
Thanks. And also for launching the Sphere satellite, how much of a priority is that? And if the Russians don't get to it in their EVA, is that something that might be considered as a get-ahead task for the American EVA?
For the U.S. EVA, you said?
Yeah, for the Russian one, the launching of the Sphere satellite, is that something, if the Russian cosmonauts don't get to it, is that something that might be added to the list of get-aheads for the American EVA?
It's a purely Russian experiment, and so we would have no plans to add that to the U.S. EVA, and it's specifically been designed, the trajectory and everything that we've analyzed. The crew will go out on the EVA ladder and push it aft, and so that doesn't really sync well with our U.S. EVA. It is just a purely Russian type experiment.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Denise. Are there any follow-ups here, Gina? Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Before we step away, let's take a look at our broadcast coverage here on NASA television for these two spacewalks, the first one coming up on August 20th. Our coverage will begin at 9 a.m. Central Time, with the EVA due to begin at 9:40, and again, it'll last close to 6.5 hours. We'll be back on August 30th for the U.S. spacewalk, which our coverage will begin at 6 a.m. Central Time, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. The actual spacewalk itself will start about an hour and 15 minutes later at 7:15 a.m. Central Time, 8:15 a.m. Eastern. And again, that will last about 6.5 hours. For the latest, just log on to the NASA website at www.nasa.gov/station. Thanks for being with us.
For tonight, only in America, here's a question for you. What is the mode of transportation that now takes twice as long to get from London to New York as it did 40 years ago? Yep, it's the airplane. When the great Sir David Frost was hosting talk shows on both sides of the Atlantic, like I do now, back in the 70s, his journey took 3 hours on Concorde. Now, since the tragic demise of that fabulous plane, it takes at least double that. This is supposed to be progress. Well, at last, possible help is at hand in the form of an astonishing aircraft called the Wave Rider, the Air Force's new X-51A hypersonic scramjet designed to fly at, wait for this, Mach 6. That's a stunning 4,500 miles an hour. The Pentagon says the technology, which it tested over the Pacific today, could eventually allow them to bring missiles or planes to the other side of the planet in minutes instead of hours. And I've got no quarrel with that. But let's not stop there, chaps. You can't taunt me with the prospect of a 1-hour transatlantic flight and tell me, sorry, buddy, this isn't for you. I've got London pubs to frequent, Arsenal soccer matches to watch, cricket to play, fish and chips to eat with mushy peas. And this $140 million Wave Ride programme will enable me to do all this and host this nightly CNN show live every night in New York. Think not what this hypersonic technology can do for your country's military, Mr. President, and focus more on what it can do for me and my morning commute. That's all for us tonight.
Now, here's your Pentagon Channel report.
The latest test flight of the Air Force's X-51A Wave Rider aircraft ended prematurely Tuesday. Air Force officials say the X-51 was launched from a B-52 bomber over the Pacific Ocean. But about 15 seconds into the flight, a fault was identified in one of the Wave Rider's control fins, causing the aircraft to plummet into the ocean. The flight was meant to be a test for the Wave Rider's hypersonic scramjet engine. The X-51 is designed to travel at Mach 6, or 6 times the speed of sound, over a 5-minute period. A previous Wave Rider test was more successful. In May 2010, the X-51 flew for more than 3 minutes at nearly 5 times the speed of sound. Only one of the 4 Wave Riders aircraft remains.
Planning a huge step forward in science and technology. Now, some critics are saying that the money would be better spent on healthcare and education for India's masses of poor people. Ram Gopal reports.
India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had a stellar, actually make that interstellar message for the world on the country's Independence Day. With the iconic Red Fort as a backdrop, India announced it's headed for the Red Planet. In his speech, Prime Minister Singh told the crowd his cabinet has approved the Mars orbiter mission, calling it a huge step for India in science and technology. The unmanned spacecraft, part of the mission known as Mangalyaan, will lift off next year on a 10-month-long flight where it will just orbit, not land on Mars, sending back photos and data. The mission's goal is to study if life ever existed or can be sustained on Mars. But India is facing a tight deadline with the launch planned for November 2013.
Timing is important because this is the time, by the time the mission gets there, that Mars will be comparatively the closest. So there's a small window in which we need to make a launch. And that's the reason why the mission has to go up next year.
The announcement comes on the heels of the success of the latest US Mars rover, Curiosity. India will be the 6th country to launch a Mars mission after the US, Russia, France, Japan and China. But India's scientists caution the country should not get caught up in a global space race.
My only concern, if anything, is not the risk of failure, it's the risk that the program should not get diverted to these high visibility, somewhat prestige-related events.
But the rewards are considered huge, and if the mission is successful, India would become the first Asian country to reach the Red Planet. Ram Gopal, CNN, Atlanta.
Good morning and welcome to Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station update. We're here with the International Space Station Flight Control Team inside the Space Station Flight Control Room at the Mission Control Center in Houston. On board the International Space Station, the 6 Expedition 32 crew members are halfway through their day. Commander Gennady Padanka, U.S. flight engineers Joe Akava and Sonny Williams, Japanese flight engineer Aki Hoshide, and Russian flight engineers Yuri Malenchenko and Sergei Revin got their wake-up call at 1 a.m. Central Time this morning and have been steadily making their way through their scheduled activities. The crew has been together for almost a full month now since William, Hoshide, and Malenchenko arrived aboard their Soyuz 31S on July 16th. They've been in space for 32 days and at the space station for 30, and they're planning to stay until November. Akaba, Padanka, and Revin, on the other hand, launched on May 14th and have been in space now for 93 days, at the station for 91. They'll be heading back to the Earth in their own Soyuz vehicle next month. With 2 spacewalks coming up before the end of the month, one in less than a week, activities today are again focused on preparation, particularly for the Russian spacewalk, which is scheduled for Monday. Commander Gennady Padanka and flight engineer Yuri Malenchenko have been working with their Orlan Russian spacesuits, installing NASA helmet lights and cameras on those suits with help from Sonny Williams, and also configuring their communication systems and checking out the telemetry and biomedical sensors. They're scheduled to perform that spacewalk beginning at 9:40 a.m. on Monday, and NASA TV coverage of the 6.5-hour-long excursion will begin at 9 a.m. Central Time. Elsewhere on the station, the other Expedition 32 crew members have been busy with science experiments. Flight engineer Joe Akaba spent some time today working on ACE, or the Advanced Colloid Experiment, which looks at the flow characteristics and evolution and ordering effects of colloids in microgravity. Meanwhile, Sonny Williams and Aki Hoshide were both scheduled to spend some time with the Integrated Cardiovascular Experiment, which studies the decrease of the heart muscle that the astronauts experience while in space. Hoshide also took part in the Pro-K experiment, which looks at how diet can decrease bone loss while in microgravity. And this afternoon we'll begin a session of the Circadian Rhythms experiment. That experiment examines how long stays in space, where the sun rises and sets 16 times a day, affect the body's circadian rhythms, which are their 24-hour light-dark cycle. The team here on the ground will command the visiting Autonomous Transfer Vehicle's thrusters to fire for 31 minutes and 16 seconds and raise the space station to an altitude of 254 miles. It's part of a regular schedule of reboost for the space station, but will also help the station take advantage of the propellant brought up by the European ATV. Also, begin getting them into place for the next Soyuz departure from the space station next month. Today we have with us Tara Rutley, who is an ISS program scientist, or the associate program scientist, to tell us a little bit about some work we saw going on yesterday in the Kibo laboratory, where flight engineer Aki Hoshide was setting up the aquatic habitat. Thanks so much for joining us, Tara.
Hey, it's really good to be back. I love talking to you guys and sharing the science that's happening. And so, yeah, it sounds like the JAXA aquatic habitat is making its way onto station, and the crew is assembling it. And I really think this is a really fun facility for future investigations, because it introduces a new type of physiological model, and that's a fish. So
Right.
the space station will get its first fish tank, to speak.
Is it basically like an aquarium, or?
Yeah, the way the hardware is set up is that it's a system of 2 aquariums, and each one is about half a liter. And the system can support anywhere from 8 to 12 fish, if they're zebrafish or medaka fish. Those are the 2 types that will be studied here. And the system is basically kind of a lot like what you'd see on the ground in terms of keeping your fish healthy. You've got an environmental control system that has a biological filter that filters out the waste. There's a lighting control system, an LED version that gives night and day light and dark cycles, so the fish have cues, because you don't get that in space station. There's automatic feeders for the fish, and there's an oxygenation system that makes sure the fish get the oxygen and the water that they need too. So it's a nice big facility that'll be located in the Kibo module of space station. And I think the first set of fish are scheduled to go up here in the fall on a Soyuz flight.
Okay.
So that's pretty exciting.
And for some reason, I'm imagining this the little plastic bags that you carry home from a fair when you win a goldfish. I'm probably not like that,
Not
though.
exactly, right? Because space flight's a little bit more complicated than that. These fish will go up in a small round container that will be loaded, and they have membranes that allow exchange of air for the fish, loaded with water, and then launched up on a Soyuz, and then automatically inserted into the habitat. When this piece of hardware gets inserted into the habitat, it will release the fish and fill the aquarium. So it's pretty exciting, and this isn't the first time that we've flown fish in space. Our JAXA colleagues have had a history of good experience with, especially zebrafish and Medaka fish they've flown in space.
That's what's going to be in this.
Yes. Particularly, they flew on the early space shuttle flights, the Space Lab flights, and they were particularly looking at changes in the fish's vestibular system, or the system responsible for balance, and that plays a big role in motion sickness. So the longest that they've ever flown fish were 16 days on a shuttle flight. So what we're looking at now for space station is about a 90-day flight. So we want to be able to breed fish over 3 different generations. So the first set of fish will be born on the ground, launched into space, survive, ideally, reproduce in space, so they'll have children, and then after that, that generation will produce more fish that were pure space bred and developed. So the things that the scientists want to look at when we're talking about looking at these fish, why would you even want to do that? Longer exposure to spaceflight tells us more about something that might be applicable to the crew health. For example, you can get a good look at these particular fish's muscle system, their skeletal system, and crew on long duration space flights have a lot of changes in their muscle and their bone systems, and so we can get a little bit of information from how these fish develop and the longer they stay as well through their bone and muscle. We also can look at effects of radiation on these particular fish as well, and in fact we may glean some really interesting information about how they develop, early development on space station, because a lot of the way even we develop, everything that develops, every living organism has this response to gravity. They develop based on this gravity vector. So it'd be really interesting to see the development progression in a situation where you take that microgravity environment away. How will these fish turn out? So I know the crew that gets these fish are excited. I've talked to them about it. They're anxious to get going on it, and it sounds like the development is progressing along. And so the first set of experiments is going to be called Medaka osteoclast. That will start in the fall when these fish go up. And osteoclast is a type of cell that's very active in breaking down the bone. It's normal. In microgravity, there seems to be a process by which they prevail and go kind of a little bit in hyperactive mode. As a result, you tend to break down more bone. So the investigators will look at the activity of the osteoclast in these fish after their long duration stay on microgravity.
Okay, well, a couple of things. You mentioned that we're going to be breeding them in the space station. I know, we brought up before, and on purpose, mice and spiders and butterflies, but have we done anything we've had several generations of?
No, nothing that's been this long term in terms of generational. We've sent up, actually, we've sent up seedlings. I think plants might be a good way to think about it. And so one of the challenges of plant growth is to just get multi-generations of seed to seed formation. So this will be, I think, the longest going investigation set in terms of generational producing of any living organisms on.
Yeah. So
space.
Not only how the ones that started on Earth adapt to microgravity, but also the ones who have never experienced gravity at all.
You got that right. Yeah.
Okay.
Neat.
Interesting. And let's see, you also said that I think that it's going to last 90 days. So that gives us a few crew that will be involved. Did they get a lot of special training for it, or is it just throw in some fish flakes? Or?
I think the training they get is specific to, injecting the fish into their home and then removing them when the investigation's over, as well as they may add some flakes to the automatic feeder. But otherwise, it's a see-through tank, so they can watch the activity of these fish swim around. So it'd be interesting to see what their perspective is, behavior-wise, what the crew thinks about having fish on orbit.
Well, this may reveal my ignorance, but, I guess we practice for spacewalks in water to simulate microgravity. The fish are already in water. Will it feel I don't know, very different to them, or is
I
it?
guess we'll find out. The vestibular studies showed some changes in their inner ears, so there's definitely something going on in terms of their physiology, I guess you could say. So it'll be interesting to see, how that manifests, and especially with that third generation. It's hard to say since we haven't gone that far before.
Okay. And I guess I also read that this could eventually be used for amphibians, possibly as well. Nothing
Yeah.
planned for
Yep.
that, but it could.
Yeah, the tank is pretty versatile. Just imagine what you could put in your tank at home that could survive maybe frogs, right? Or snails, or eels even. I've seen it. I was just at the aquarium a few days ago with my daughter, and we were
really?
looking at fish, and I'm going, what could survive in that aquatic habitat? I was wondering the same thing myself. So who knows? We have a long time on space station.
Just have a menagerie up there eventually.
That's right. You never know.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking
You're
with us. I
very
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Again, this was Tara Rutley, the Associate Program Scientist for the Space Station, talking with us about the aquatic habitat that astronaut Aki Hoshide put together yesterday on the space station inside the Kibo Laboratory.